Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Digital Doppelganger, Terror of the Deepfake Imposter. I had always thought of my life as quiet, maybe even dull by some standards. The morning had started like any other. I woke to the dull buzz of my phone on the nightstand, the pale light of dawn seeping through the blinds. I ignored the usual stream of emails and notifications for a moment, savoring the quiet before the day began. Coffee was brewing in the kitchen, the rich aroma filling the small apartment. I sat at the window, watching a thin slice of sky turn from gray to blue, the city slowly rubbing sleep from its eyes. I worked as a junior editor at a modest publishing house downtown. The job wasn't glamorous, but I liked the work, sorting manuscripts, catching typos, occasionally helping with blurbs. It was the kind of job that kept me tethered to a world of stories without demanding I be the center of one. I preferred it that way. My phone blinked again, another notification. I glanced down, expecting the usual, a text from my sister, a Facebook update, something mundane. Instead, I froze. There was a new post on a social media account I didn't recognize at first. The profile picture, however, was unmistakable. It was me. Or rather, a hyper-realistic deepfake of me, captured in a frozen moment of a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. The username was a jumbled string of letters and numbers that had no meaning to me. The post itself was chilling. A short video, less than 30 seconds, but enough to unsettle me. The deepfake me was saying things I would never say, violent threats, vague but pointed, aimed at people I knew. Worse still, the account was tagged with my real phone number and email address. It was as if someone was trying to blow up my world, piece by piece. I tapped the screen, heart pounding, scrolling through the account's feed. There were other posts, photoshopped images of me at places I'd never been, screenshots of conversations I never had, personal information I had never shared online. The posts were growing more frequent, more aggressive. Comments flooded in, some accusing me outright, others expressing fear or disgust. Friends were tagging me, asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay. My fingers trembled as I tried to log into my real accounts, double-checking for any breaches. Everything seemed intact, no signs of intrusion. But this fake profile was a different beast, slick, polished, designed to look like me, to sound like me, but not me. I called my sister first. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the worry beneath. "Did you post those things?" she asked, voice low. "No. I swear, I didn't." I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the small room. Someone's pretending to be me. They're trying to ruin me. She didn't say anything after that, just promised to keep an eye on things and be ready if I needed help. The rest of the day blurred into a haze of calls to tech support, frantic emails to the platform hosting the account, and a growing sense of panic that settled deep in my chest. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to find someone lurking in the shadows of my life, waiting to pull the curtain back and reveal the nightmare for real. By evening, the posts had escalated. The threats were more direct now, naming people I worked with, people I cared about. The fake accounts seemed to know things only I should know, details from conversations, photographs from recent events. It was like someone had been watching me closely, learning how to mimic not just my face and voice, but my life. I wanted to scream, to run, to hide. Instead, I sat at my desk, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating tired eyes and a face I barely recognized anymore. Whoever was behind this had started something dangerous, and I had no idea how to stop it. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. And yet, as I stared at the screen, a cold dread settled over me. What if I couldn't stop them? What if this was only the beginning? The silence in the room grew heavier, pressing down on me like a physical weight. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. I wanted to respond, to reach out to someone, anyone, but trust felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Every contact, every friend, every connection was a potential vulnerability now. The messages kept coming. Cryptic, threatening, relentless. Each one more unsettling than the last. They hinted at secrets I didn't even know I was hiding, at betrayals buried deep in my past. How much did they know? How long had they been watching me? The questions swirled in my mind, poisonous and unrelenting. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe. Panic was a useless companion here. I needed a plan, a way to fight back. But where to begin when the enemy was invisible and omnipresent? I thought about the people I trusted most, my sister, maybe an old colleague with hacking skills. But dragging them into this could put them in danger, too. No, I had to be smarter. I started by tracing the IP addresses, looking for any digital breadcrumbs. Hours passed as I sifted through lines of code and metadata, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that seemed designed to remain unsolvable. Occasionally, a name would flash, a server, a proxy, a location, but each lead dissolved into a dead end. Still, I couldn't stop. Not now. The stakes were too high. Somewhere in the labyrinth of data was a thread that, if pulled, might unravel the whole web they'd woven around me. I just had to find it before it was too late. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the cluttered surface of my desk. The inbox was a mess. New emails, notifications, alerts from accounts I barely remembered signing up for. The deepfake videos had multiplied overnight. Each one was more disturbing than the last, my face, my voice, twisted into threats and confessions I never made. There was a sick artistry to it, an attention to detail that made the whole thing feel impossibly personal. Whoever was behind this didn't just want to destroy me. They wanted to make sure I felt it, every second. I sat back and tried to breathe through the tight knot in my chest. A plan was forming, slow and jagged. First, the basics. I needed to secure my accounts. Change every password, enable two-factor authentication where possible, lock down any digital foothold they might have gained. Then, trace the source of the attacks again, more methodically this time. The IP addresses hadn't led anywhere concrete yesterday, but maybe I'd missed something, some pattern, some relay point. My phone buzzed beside me. A text from Mom. Are you okay? You didn't answer last night. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back slowly. Not really. I'll call you later. I didn't want to worry her, but I knew I couldn't keep this from her forever. Still, I hesitated. Sharing this nightmare felt like handing over a weapon with a hair trigger. The hours blurred as I dove back into the digital underworld I barely understood. Proxy servers, VPNs, TOR nodes, names and numbers that meant little to me but represented the architecture of this attack. I cross-referenced timestamps with the deepfake uploads and the threatening messages. A pattern emerged. The posts always went live around 3 a.m., and the IP addresses bounced around 3 cities, Chicago, Atlanta, and somewhere near a small town in Ohio. None of those locations felt like home, or anywhere I'd been recently. Then a new detail caught my eye. An email I'd overlooked from a week ago, buried beneath promotional spam. It was from a company called Verity Labs, a small startup specializing in AI-driven video processing. The email subject line read, "Inquiry about your public speaking footage." I didn't remember sending anything like that, but the sender's address looked legitimate. I opened the message carefully. The email said they'd noticed some of my public talks were being used without permission in their datasets, and they wanted to clarify usage rights. Beneath the formal language was a subtle hint that they were tracking the spread of my images online. I forwarded the email to myself and started researching Verity Labs. Their website was slick but sparse, and the team appeared small. The domain was registered just 6 months ago. Something about it felt off. Then my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, local. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A woman's voice, calm but firm. "Is this James Carter?" "Yes. I'm Detective Lang from the Cyber Crimes Unit. We need to talk about your online accounts. You've been targeted." My heart jumped. "I'm already aware. Someone is using my face and voice to post violent threats." "Right. We've seen the posts. They're escalating. We have reason to believe this is part of a larger campaign targeting multiple individuals. You're not alone." The line went quiet for a moment. I realized she was waiting. "Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" I asked. "Not yet. But we're tracking a network of compromised servers. Some of the IPs you mentioned match the ones we're seeing. We think this is coordinated, possibly politically motivated." That made sense in a way I didn't want to admit. I wasn't a public figure, but I'd been outspoken online, nothing outrageous, but enough to step on a few toes. "Detective, is there anything I can do? Any way to help?" She sighed. "Keep documenting everything. Don't respond to the threats. And if you get anything, new files, messages, videos, send them to us immediately. We'll try to trace the source, but these hackers are sophisticated." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you. I'll do that." After the call ended, I sat back, feeling the weight of the investigation settling on my shoulders. The nightmare wasn't just personal, it was part of something bigger and darker. I glanced back at the laptop. There, waiting for me, was a new message notification, this time on my personal email. The subject line was chilling. "We know what you did." I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a video attachment. I clicked hesitantly. The screen filled with a grainy, handheld recording. The angle was shaky, but the scene was unmistakable, a dimly lit parking garage. A figure I recognized, me, was there, speaking quietly into a phone. The timestamp was from 3 years ago, a night I had trying to forget. What I said was barely audible, but the words were clear enough, a secret I'd never shared with anyone, a mistake that had haunted me since. The message was clear. They had access to my past, my darkest moments, and they weren't afraid to use them. My breath caught. How had they gotten this footage? Who was watching me all this time? Before I could process, another email popped in. This one was from an anonymous address, no subject, just one line in the body. "You have 48 hours to stop digging, or everything falls apart." I shut the laptop with a snap, heart pounding. The digital nightmare had crossed into real life, and now the stakes were terrifyingly clear. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation anymore. I was fighting to keep my life from unraveling completely. The morning after the emails arrived, I woke with a tight knot in my stomach that no amount of coffee could loosen. I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. My inbox was a mess, dozens of new messages, some from friends and colleagues expressing concern, others from strangers sending warnings or, worse, threats. The hacked deepfake account was still active, posting violent threats under my name, mixing lies with snippets of truth I couldn't ignore. The line between what was real and what was fabricated blurred until I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I needed answers, or at least some way to fight back. That meant digging deeper, even though the email's ultimatum echoed in my head. You have 48 hours to stop digging, or everything falls apart. I wasn't sure what everything meant, but I knew I couldn't back down. My phone buzzed. Detective Ramirez. I've been looking into the IP addresses tied to the deepfake posts, she said. Nothing concrete yet, but I might have a lead. There's a pattern. Activity spikes whenever you post something online. I ran a hand through my hair. So someone's watching me in real time? Exactly. Whoever this is, they're patient and precise. They've got access to your past, like that video, and now they're monitoring your present. It's not just harassment. It's control. Any chance it's someone I know? She hesitated. Possibly. But I want you to be careful. If this is someone close, they're playing a long game. I swallowed hard. There weren't many people I trusted, not anymore. After the call, I stared at the screen, scrolling through the hacked account's posts again. One message caught my eye. It wasn't a threat, but a name, M. Carter. It was signed at the bottom of a cryptic comment on a recent post, something about unfinished business. I didn't recognize the name immediately, but it nagged at me. I pulled up my contacts and searched for Carter. Nothing obvious, but then I remembered an old colleague from my first job, Mark Carter. We parted ways acrimoniously years ago after a project went south. I hadn't thought about him in ages. Could he be involved? It seemed too coincidental. I dug into Mark Carter online, skimming through his social media and professional profiles. He had disappeared from public view around the same time I started seeing the first signs of the deepfake attacks. No recent posts, no activity. But then something odd appeared, a mention in a tech forum discussing deepfake technology and online harassment. The post was under a pseudonym, but the writing style was familiar, too familiar. I'd seen it before in the messages sent to me. My heart pounded. Was Mark behind this? But why? What did he want? I reached out to an old friend, Jenna, someone who had worked with Mark after we parted ways. She picked up almost immediately. Jenna, do you know anything about Mark Carter and deepfake tech? I asked cautiously. There was a pause. Why? What's going on? I hesitated but decided to tell her everything, the hacked account, the video, the threats. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. That doesn't surprise me. Mark's been involved with some dark corners of the tech world, black hat hackers, people who exploit vulnerabilities to ruin lives. He's dangerous. Do you think he's targeting me? I wouldn't be shocked. You two have history, and he's always had a grudge. But if he's behind this, he's not working alone. These things don't happen in a vacuum. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. What should I do? Be careful. And don't trust anyone new without checking first. If you want, I can help dig up more on him, but it'll take time. Please, I said, relief flooding through me. At least I wasn't entirely alone. That afternoon, I sat with Jenna on a video call, sharing screens and piecing together what little we could find. The deeper we went, the clearer it became. Mark Carter had connections to a shadowy online network specializing in identity theft, harassment, and manipulation. Their methods were ruthless, and their reach extended far beyond what I'd imagined. Then, just as Jenna was pulling up a new document, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. The sender was anonymous, the subject line, "Proof you're in over your head." I opened it reluctantly. Inside was a file, an audio recording. I pressed play. The voice on the other end was distorted but unmistakably familiar. It was Mark Carter. "I warned you to stop," he said, voice cold. "You don't know what you've stumbled into. Back off now, or you'll see what happens when you cross me." The message ended with a chilling click. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. It was personal. Mark Carter was not only behind the digital nightmare, but was now making it clear that the threats were real and dangerous. As I sat there, heart racing, another message popped up on the hacked deepfake account. This one was different. No threats, no secrets. Just a photo. It was taken from inside my apartment. The angle was unmistakable. My living room couch, the coffee table, even my laptop open on the desk. Someone had been inside my home. The digital nightmare had crossed the last line. My sanctuary was breached. And now, there was no turning back. The night stretched on, thick and suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I hadn't slept since I found it. I paced my apartment in the early hours, phone in hand, waiting for Jenna's call. When it finally came, I was too restless to sit still. "Did you find anything new?" I asked, voice low, almost a whisper. "Not much," Jenna said, her voice tight. But I dug deeper into Mark Carter's network. There's evidence suggesting he's part of a larger group, people who specialize in digital harassment, but also physical intimidation. They use stolen identities to manipulate victims, then escalate to real-world threats when the digital pressure isn't enough. I swallowed hard. So he's not just a disgruntled ex or a petty hacker. This is something bigger. More organized. Exactly. And whatever they want, it's personal. They're trying to break you completely. The thought was almost unbearable. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation anymore. I was fighting for my safety, my life. "Jenna," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I need to know if someone's been inside my apartment. If anything's missing, moved, or—" "Have you called the police?" she interrupted gently. "No. Not yet. I'm scared," I admitted. "If I call them, it might escalate things. And what proof do I even have, beyond a photo? They could say it's a fake." There was a long pause. "You're right to be cautious, but you can't ignore this. Maybe start by checking your locks and security cameras, if you have them. And don't be alone, okay?" I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I'll double-check everything today. And I'm coming to your place tomorrow. I don't want to be here alone." "Good," Jenna said firmly. "We'll get through this." After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling until dawn. The image of my invaded home burned behind my eyes. Morning brought no relief. If anything, the tension only tightened its grip. I methodically went through my apartment, checking every lock, every window latch. Nothing was broken or forced, which made the intrusion all the more terrifying. Whoever had been inside knew how to get in silently and leave without a trace. I found my laptop still logged in, the screen dim but awake. The cursor blinked as if someone had just stepped away. I hesitated, then pulled up the security camera app on my phone. I'd installed the system months ago, but never really used it much. Tonight, the recordings were the only thing standing between me and unknown terror. The footage was patchy, the low light making it hard to see details. But then, at 3:17 a.m., the hallway outside my apartment door shifted. A figure in dark clothes slipped inside, moving carefully, like a ghost. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched them step into the frame, their face obscured by a hood. I grabbed screenshots and forwarded them to Jenna immediately. Minutes later, her reply came. "This is bad. We need to alert someone." Before I could answer, my phone vibrated again, a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or next time it won't be a picture but something worse." I dropped the phone onto the couch, the message burning like acid in my mind. Later that day, I met Jenna at her apartment. She had her laptop open, a mess of tabs and documents spread across the screen. The tension between us was palpable, but it was a shared tension, like a fragile alliance forged in the heat of this ordeal. "Look at this," Jenna said, pulling up a map of the city overlaid with data points. I cross-referenced the IP addresses from the hacked account's activity. There's a cluster of logins from a warehouse district not far from here. It matches some of the other digital footprints Mark Carter's group has used before. I frowned. So they're local? That close? Yeah. And it gets worse. Jenna's fingers flew over the keyboard. There's been a spike in similar harassment cases in the area over the last 6 months. All victims are connected to people who've refused to back down after being threatened online. It's a pattern. I swallowed hard, the weight of it settling even deeper. What if they're watching us now? Here, with you? She looked up, eyes fierce. Then we need to be smarter. No more digital traces. No unencrypted messages, no calls without masks or proxies. I nodded, feeling the walls close and tighter. For the first time, the nightmare felt inescapable. That night, I barely touched my dinner. The silence of Jenna's apartment was thick, broken only by the occasional hum of her computer. We were both wired, eyes darting to every shadow, every unexpected sound. Then, just as I was about to suggest calling it a night, Jenna's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and paled. "It's from the same anonymous account," she said quietly. "They posted a new video." I leaned in, heart pounding. The video was grainy but unmistakable. It showed me, asleep on my couch, footage I never could have imagined someone capturing. The camera angle shifted slowly, lingering on my face before cutting to black. Underneath, a caption, "You're already inside your own prison." A cold shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was surveillance. It was control. And it was only going to get worse. Jenna looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "We have to go to the police now. This is beyond anything we can handle alone." I nodded, but deep down, I was terrified. Because I knew whoever was doing this wasn't just after me. They were after everything I was. And if they had the power to watch me sleep, then no place was safe anymore. As we packed up to leave, my phone lit up again. Another message. "You think you can run? We're already inside." The words echoed in the silence, a promise and a threat. And in that moment, I realized the nightmare was far from over. It had only just begun. The morning light came harsh and unforgiving through the cracked blinds, casting narrow bands of white across the floor. I stared at my phone, the screen dark and mute for the first time in days. No new messages. No videos. No threats. It was almost a relief, but the quiet felt unnatural, like the eye of a storm that hadn't passed but was gathering strength. "We have to go to the police," Jenna said again, her voice steady but low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile calm. "I've been on the phone with Detective Harris. He says they'll take this seriously now. They've got people looking into the hacks, the IPs, everything. They want to track whoever's behind this." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach didn't ease. The police were a line of defense, sure, but what if the person behind this was closer than we thought? What if they were watching us right now? Jenna reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We did everything we could. We covered our tracks, changed passwords, went dark where we could. This nightmare isn't over yet, but we're not helpless. I looked at her, grateful for her calm in the eye of the storm. For weeks, she had been my anchor, the only person who believed me without hesitation or doubt. but even her confidence couldn't erase the dread gnawing at me. Later that day, I sat in the police station, recounting every detail, every threat, every video, every suspicious message. Detective Harris listened carefully, typing notes on his tablet, his face unreadable but focused. He promised to keep me updated, but I could tell this was going to take time I didn't have if my reputation was unraveling online by the minute. I left the station with a folder of documents, a temporary restraining order against the anonymous accounts, and a list of cybersecurity contacts. The digital nightmare was far from over, but at least now I had a lifeline. Back in my apartment, I stared at the blank screen of my laptop. The deepfake videos, the threats, the invasion of privacy, it all felt like a violation so intimate it was impossible to shake. I realized I hadn't cried in days. Not because I was strong, but because I was numb. Then my phone buzzed. My heart leapt, but it wasn't a message from the hacker. It was Jenna. Found something. Meet me. I grabbed my coat and headed out, a flicker of hope stirring in the pit of my stomach. Jenna was waiting at our usual coffee shop, laptop open and eyes sharp. I traced some of the accounts, she said, not looking up from the screen. The IP addresses lead to a VPN service, which is normal for this kind of thing. But one of them, there's a slip-up. It connected through a home network in the city. Someone forgot to mask their tracks. I leaned in. Do you know who? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. It's someone from your workplace. A cold wave of betrayal washed over me. No, that can't be. She clicked a file open. It's Mark. Mark, the colleague who had always been a little too competitive, the one who'd made snide comments about my work behind my back. The one I dismissed as harmless office politics. But now, the picture was chillingly clear. He's been hacking your accounts, posting the threats, leaking your secrets, Jenna said. He wanted to ruin you. I felt a lump rise in my throat, a mix of anger and disbelief. How had I not seen it? The tension between us, the way he'd smirk when things went wrong for me, was it just rivalry, or something darker? We handed over the evidence to Detective Harris, who promised to move quickly. Within days, Mark was confronted. His denial crumbled under the weight of digital proof, and the mask of civility cracked, revealing a bitterness I hadn't imagined. The trial was a blur of testimony, media coverage, and long nights. The deepfake videos were taken down, the accounts suspended, and Mark was charged with multiple counts of cyber harassment and identity theft. The relief I felt was tempered by the scars left behind, not just on my reputation, but on the fragile trust I'd placed in the people around me. In the aftermath, I found myself retreating from social media, rebuilding my digital presence carefully, cautiously. The world online no longer felt like a place I could inhabit freely. But I also found unexpected strength in the experience and understanding that the line between the virtual and the real was thinner than I'd ever realized. Jenna stayed by my side, a constant reminder that even in the darkest times, connection mattered more than any screen. We talked often about boundaries, about safety, about what it meant to live in a world where your identity could be stolen with a few clicks. One evening, weeks after the verdict, I sat on my balcony, the city lights flickering below. The nightmare hadn't vanished, it had changed me. I was more guarded, yes, but also more determined. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my life. I pulled out my phone, hesitated, then opened a new account, this one locked down tighter than before. A small, deliberate step toward reclaiming my voice. As I typed the first post, I realized something. The horror had been in losing control, in being powerless. But now, I was fighting back. Not with threats or anger, but with truth, with vigilance, with the unshakable knowledge that no one could erase who I really was. And if the nightmare ever returned, I would be ready. The city breathed around me, indifferent yet alive. The shadows still flickered at the edges of my vision, but they no longer held the power to consume me. I was here. I was real. And I would not disappear. Story 2, Silent Watchers, Neighbors with Dark Intentions. I moved into the house on Linden Street in early spring, when the air still smelled of thawing earth and freshly cut grass. The house itself wasn't much to boast about: 3 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a small backyard fenced in by weathered wooden slats. But it was mine, and that meant something. I spent the first few days unpacking boxes, stacking books, and setting up the modest shelves I'd brought from my last place. It was routine, grounding. I had no grand plans, just the hope of a steady job and a little peace. On the 3rd day, while I was fixing a loose doorknob, I noticed a moving truck parked across the street. I hadn't realized the house next door was empty until then. A middle-aged couple emerged from the truck, both wearing pale blue gloves and matching smiles that seemed practiced, like actors greeting an audience. They introduced themselves as the Millers, Craig and Elaine. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Craig said, shaking my hand firmly. Elaine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but her voice was warm. They asked about the house, about how long I'd lived here. I answered cautiously, not wanting to seem unfriendly but wary of strangers who showed up unannounced. Over the next week, they stopped by more often than I expected. Sometimes it was for a quick hello, other times for small favors. "Could we borrow a ladder?" Elaine asked one afternoon. "We need to fix a gutter before the rain comes." Another day, Craig asked if I had any spare extension cords or garden tools. Each request was polite, reasonable. What unsettled me wasn't the borrowing itself, it was their questions. They asked about my daily schedule with unnerving precision. "Do you usually leave the house early in the morning?" Elaine inquired while watering her front lawn. "Is your workday predictable?" I find routines help with planning. I brushed it off as neighborly curiosity, but there was a strange intensity to the way they listened, as if they were cataloging every detail for some unseen ledger. I tried to keep my answers vague, but their follow-up questions grew oddly specific. One evening, around dusk, I caught Elaine standing near the corner of my driveway, pretending to admire a rose bush. She looked up and smiled when she saw me at the window. "Is this your favorite spot in the garden?" she asked, nodding toward the wilted blooms. "Yes," I replied, the voice in my throat tighter than I wanted. "I try to keep it alive." She nodded knowingly, but instead of leaving, she lingered for a moment, as if studying the way I moved. Then she said, "I'm always impressed by how people tend their spaces. It says a lot about them." The next morning, I realized my garden hose was missing. I checked the usual places, behind the shed, coiled near the faucet, but it was gone. I thought perhaps the wind had knocked it loose, or maybe I misplaced it during yard work. When I stepped outside, I saw Greg unloading tools from their garage, the hose coiled neatly among them. I called out, "Hey, have you seen my garden hose?" Craig looked up, his smile quick and smooth. "Oh, we borrowed it yesterday. Needed to wash the car. Sorry, didn't mean to keep it. Could you let me know next time?" I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Of course," he said. "Neighbors should share, right?" They returned the hose that afternoon, but the incident left a sour taste. I started locking the back door, something I hadn't felt necessary before. Still, I convinced myself it was just a misunderstanding. Then came the note. It was slipped under my front door one morning, a small square of paper, neatly folded. I unfolded it with curiosity and found a message written in delicate, precise handwriting. "We noticed you leave for work every day at 8:12. We hope your commute is pleasant. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." My heart skipped. How had they known the exact time I left? I never mentioned it aloud. I looked out the window. No sign of the Millers. That afternoon, I thought about mentioning it to a coworker, but the words caught somewhere between concern and embarrassment. It felt trivial, but also wrong. I resolved to keep an eye on things. Later that evening, as I sat on the couch reading, a soft knock came at the door. I opened it to find Elaine holding a small package. "For you," she said, her smile genuine this time. "Just a little welcome gift." Inside was a jar of homemade jam and a handwritten recipe card. "Thank you," I said, touched despite myself. As she turned to leave, she paused. "By the way, if you ever take different routes to work or change your schedule, please let us know. It helps us keep track of the neighborhood." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "Of course," I replied cautiously, closing the door. That night, sleep came in fits. The quiet of Linden Street felt heavier somehow, like the shadows held their breath. I realized that behind those perfect smiles was something different, something watching, waiting. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but I knew one thing: my ordinary life was starting to unravel, and the neighbors were at the center of it. I didn't know then how far their obsession would go, or how deeply it would pull me in. But I was about to find out, and by then, it would be too late to turn back. The next morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach, the note from the Millers still fresh in my mind. I left the house a little earlier than usual, hoping to throw off whatever unseen clock they claimed to keep. At 7:55, I slipped out the front door, locking it behind me with a satisfying click. The air was crisp, the kind of coolness that promised a clear day, but I felt none of its freshness. My eyes darted repeatedly toward the Millers' house across the street. The blinds were closed, but I caught a fleeting glimpse of movement. Elaine, no doubt, just out of sight. It felt deliberate, as if they were waiting for me. Work was a blur. I answered emails in a daze, my mind half on the screen and half tangled in suspicion. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, mapped, catalogued. Every ping of my phone made me jump. When lunch came, a solitary sandwich at my desk, I found myself scanning the windows, imagining the Millers' faces pressed against the glass, their perfect smiles warped into something less benign. That evening, I decided I needed to know more. I couldn't live in this fog of paranoia. I pulled on my jacket and stepped outside, feigning a walk around the block but really circling the Millers' yard. Their garden was immaculate, flower beds lined with fresh mulch, not a leaf out of place. A small, white picket fence separated their yard from mine, low enough to see over easily. I leaned on it, pretending to tie my shoe, and peered through the window nearest the front door. Inside, the living room was spotless. A vase of fresh daisies sat on the coffee table, and on the wall hung a large framed calendar, each day meticulously crossed out with a thick black marker. I frowned. There was something obsessive about it, but I couldn't tell what. I stepped back quickly when I heard a floorboard creak behind me. Elaine's voice was soft but sharp. "Nice evening for a walk, isn't it?" I turned to find her standing just a few feet away, her smile calm and unreadable. I just wanted to check the mailbox," I stammered, feeling foolish. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You're very conscientious about your mail. It's good to be aware of your surroundings." I nodded, suddenly eager to end the encounter. "Yeah. Well, you never know." Elaine's smile deepened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "If you ever want to borrow something, don't hesitate to ask. We're happy to help." I forced a smile and backed away, the sense of being under a microscope prickling my skin. Once inside, I locked the door and peeked through the peephole. The Millers were standing side by side, staring directly at me. Their heads tilted in unison, as if synchronized by some hidden cue. The next day, the note appeared again, this time slipped under the back door. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. "We saw you leave at 7:55 today. That's a new record. Impressive." I swallowed hard. They were watching every move, every variation. It wasn't just routine, it was an intrusion. My privacy was eroding, grain by grain. That night, I found myself unable to sleep. I sat by the window, watching the street bathed in moonlight. Across from me, a single light flickered on in the Miller's house. I thought I saw Elaine standing still, staring into the darkness like a sentinel. A sudden crash made me jump. I ran to the source, the kitchen. A glass had shattered on the floor. I hadn't heard anyone enter. My heart pounded as I scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place except the shards scattered beneath the countertop. I cleaned it up quickly, but the incident left me rattled. Was it a warning? A clumsy accident? I couldn't be sure. I started doubting my own senses, wondering if the stress was twisting reality. The following afternoon, I received an unexpected knock. Opening the door, I found Jim Miller holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said, his voice low but friendly. Inside was a compact digital camera. "We thought it might help you document your day." "Sometimes it's good to keep track," Jim said, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. I forced a thank you, feeling the weight of the gift like a noose tightening around my neck. As he turned to leave, he paused. "By the way, your morning jog route, does it always loop through Maple Park? We've been thinking of trying it ourselves." I blinked. "Yes, usually." "Why?" "Just curious," he said, smiling broadly. "It's a lovely route." The next morning, I took a detour, running down a different street. When I returned, the camera was sitting on my doorstep, powered on, its screen displaying a series of photos I hadn't taken: my front door, the sidewalk, my bedroom window. Panic surged through me. They were inside my space, invading every corner. I wanted to scream, to call the police, but a creeping fear held me back. What if they denied everything? What if no one believed me? I packed the camera away, heart hammering, and locked every door and window twice over. The Miller's perfect smiles now felt like masks hiding something far darker. And I was trapped in their game. That night, as I lay in bed, a soft shuffling sound came from outside my window. I held my breath and peered through the blinds. A shadow moved, a silhouette too tall to be a stray animal. My mind raced. Was it Jim? Elaine? Or someone else entirely? I reached for my phone to call for help, but the screen went black. The power had gone out. In the suffocating silence, I realized one terrifying truth: on this quiet street, no one was truly safe. Morning came sluggishly, the kind of gray light that pressed against my curtains and made the room feel colder than it actually was. I finally got up and dressed, my hands shaking as I tried to steady my coffee cup. The camera from Jim sat on the counter, its black lens staring back at me like an accusing eye. I debated throwing it away, smashing it, but something held me back. Maybe it was the faint hope it might reveal something I hadn't seen yet. I grabbed the camera and headed out, pretending to run errands but really just circling the block, trying to shake the weight of paranoia. The Miller's house sat at the end of the street, immaculate as ever. Elaine was watering her garden, humming softly, her smile too wide and fixed. Jim was inside. I could see him through the curtains, standing still like a statue. I ducked into the small park nearby, the one with the crumbling bench and the rusted swing set. There, I finally powered on the camera. The screen blinked to life, and I scrolled through the photos again. There were dozens: my door, the mailbox, the back fence, the inside of my bedroom, shots taken from angles that made my skin crawl. I stared at one in particular, a close-up of the lock on my front door. The photo was crisp, as if the camera had been inches away. But how? I had no memory of anyone getting that close. Then something new caught my eye, a timestamp, faint but there. Most photos were taken during daylight, but a few were marked at odd hours, like 2:17 a.m. and 3:03 a.m. That explained the shadow outside my window last night. They were watching me, in real time, while I was asleep. My fingers trembled as I scrolled to the last image. It was different. Not a photo, but a short video clip. I hesitated, then tapped play. The screen showed my living room, dimly lit by a street lamp through the curtains. For a breathless moment, I thought it was empty, but then the figure moved into view. It was Jim, crouching near my couch, his face half hidden in shadows. He adjusted something on the floor, some kind of small device, maybe a microphone or a camera. His smile was chilling, like a predator pleased with a fresh catch. I snapped the camera shut and shoved it into my bag. I couldn't stay here anymore. I had to know what they were up to, and fast. Back on the street, I paced, trying to formulate a plan. Calling the police felt useless. Without proof, I'd just sound crazy. And if the Millers were clever enough to disable my power last night, they'd be ready for any official visit. No, I needed to find something concrete, something undeniable. That afternoon, I convinced myself to knock on their door. Elaine answered, radiant as ever, holding a freshly baked pie. "Hello again," she said in that syrupy tone. "Come in, please. Jim's just in the garden." I stepped inside, the house smelling of vanilla and something floral, too perfect, too staged. Elaine motioned for me to sit in the living room, where framed photos lined the shelves. Family portraits, smiling faces, vacations. Except none looked familiar. They weren't from their lives, they seemed curated, as if chosen to project the image they wanted me to see. "So," Elaine began, setting the pie on the coffee table, "how are you settling in? We want to be good neighbors. It's so important, you know, to feel safe where you live." I nodded carefully, watching her hands. "Actually, I wanted to ask about something. The camera. Why did you give it to me?" Her smile didn't falter. "Just a friendly gesture. We thought it might help you feel more comfortable, maybe document your day. Sometimes, when you're new, it's nice to have a little support." I forced a laugh but felt the lie hanging between us like a thick fog. "Support, huh?" "Of course," she said, leaning forward. "Jim's been telling me how you've been running at Maple Park every morning. It's such a lovely route. We love routines, don't you? There's comfort in knowing what to expect." I swallowed hard, trying to hide the panic rising in my throat. "Yeah, routines are important." Elaine's eyes glimmered, almost too bright. "Jim mentioned you took a different route yesterday. That was brave." "Just wanted a change," I said, trying to sound casual. She nodded slowly, like a teacher praising a student. "Sometimes, change is necessary. But it can be unsettling. We worry about our neighbors. We want to keep everyone safe." Her words sent a chill through me. There was something carefully measured in every sentence, as if she was rehearsing a script. Before I could respond, Jim appeared in the doorway, wiping dirt from his hands. "Elaine's right," he said, voice low and steady. "We just want to make sure you're okay." "Thanks," I said, standing up. "I appreciate it." They walked me to the door, their smiles wide and perfect as always. But as I stepped outside, I noticed a small envelope slipped under the door, a neat square of paper, sealed with red wax. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I looked back at the Miller's house, the curtains twitching as if they were watching me. Once inside, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a neat, precise font. "We see you. We know your patterns. This street is home to all of us. You belong here now." My heart pounded. The message wasn't a threat, it was a declaration, a chilling assertion of control. I glanced around my apartment, suddenly feeling smaller, more vulnerable. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were watchers, wardens, and I was trapped in their carefully crafted web. That night, I waited by the window, the camera hidden beneath my coat. The power stayed on, but the house felt darker somehow, as if the Millers had drawn the shadows closer. And then, just past midnight, my phone vibrated. A new message from an unknown number. "Sleep well. We'll be watching." The screen went black. I realized then that the game had changed. The Millers weren't just obsessed, they were dangerous. And no matter what I did, no one on this street would be safe. The morning light spilled weakly through the blinds, but I barely noticed. I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the apartment, every distant car horn, every tick of the clock seemed amplified, a reminder that I was being watched. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself out of bed. The envelope still lay on the kitchen table, stark and accusing. I shoved it into my jacket pocket, proof, if I needed it, that the Millers had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. The worst part wasn't just a message. It was the way they'd inserted themselves into every minute of my life. Their questions about my route, my habits, the way Jim praised me like a child for taking a different street. It was all a sick game to them, one they played with an unsettling precision. I decided I needed answers. If the Millers wanted control, I would find a way to wrest it back. But the plan I formed wasn't about confrontation. Not yet. I needed to watch, to listen, to understand how deep their obsession went. I slipped on a jacket and left my apartment, moving carefully, my eyes scanning the quiet street. The Millers' house was calm, as always. Their curtains twitching slightly as if they were aware of my gaze. I walked past their lawn slowly, pretending to check my phone but really trying to catch a glimpse of any movement inside. Nothing. The street was empty except for a few early risers walking their dogs or fetching their morning paper. No one seemed out of the ordinary. Then I heard the knock. It was soft but deliberate, coming from the side of my building. I froze, heart hammering, and glanced toward the sound. Jim stood there, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, his perfect smile slightly less bright in the morning light. "Morning," he said casually. "Thought I'd drop by. Elaine wanted me to check if you needed anything." I forced a smile, not trusting my voice. "Thanks. I'm okay." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We want to help. You seem unsettled." His eyes locked onto mine, unwavering. "I'm fine," I said, trying to sound firm. "Just a little tired." Jim nodded slowly, like he was weighing my words. "It's important to feel safe. We all do. Maybe we can talk? Over coffee?" I hesitated. Inviting him and felt like handing over another piece of myself, but refusing might escalate things. "Okay," I said finally. "Just coffee." Inside, the apartment suddenly felt smaller. Jim sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "I want you to understand," he said quietly. "We watch because we care. This street is more than neighbors. We're a community. And communities protect each other." His words should have offered comfort, but all I felt was dread. "Protect how?" I asked. By watching me. Sending messages? Jim's smile flickered, a shadow crossing his face. Some things are necessary, even if they're uncomfortable. You took a different route yesterday. It concerned us. I swallowed hard. Because I don't want to be watched. He leaned forward, voice dropping. But you are. Whether you like it or not. The room seemed to close in around me. I realized then that this wasn't about safety or community. It was about control. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Jim glanced at it, then back at me, his expression unreadable. I picked it up. Another message from the unknown number. My breath caught as I read. Your choices don't matter. You belong here. I looked up sharply. Jim's smile returned, colder this time. We all belong. You'll see. Panic surged through me, but so did a fierce determination. I wouldn't let them win. As Jim stood to leave, I noticed something on the floor near the door, a small, folded piece of paper. I picked it up discreetly after he stepped outside and the door clicked shut behind him. Unfolding it, I found a list. Names. Addresses. Times. My name was at the top, with a time marked in the next column, tonight. The Millers were planning something. And I was the target. I locked the door, heart racing, the shadows in my apartment suddenly feeling alive and hungry. Outside, the street remained silent, the perfect smiles behind the curtains watching, waiting. And I knew then that whatever came next, I wouldn't be ready. But I had to try. Because if I didn't, no one on this street would be safe, not really. I slid the list into my jacket pocket, the weight of it a cold reminder pressing against my ribs. The clock ticked louder than ever, as if mocking the slow crawl of time toward my appointed hour. I needed a plan, but the pieces were scattered, no clear path, only fragments of suspicion and dread. A sudden knock shattered the silence, sharp and urgent. I froze, every muscle coiling tight. Who could it be at this hour? Not them. Not yet. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but empty hallway, the dim bulb flickering overhead. Just the wind, I whispered, but the unease settled deeper. I turned back to the list, tracing the names with trembling fingers. The Millers weren't just targeting me, they were sending a message, a dark promise cloaked behind familiar smiles. I grabbed my coat, keys, anything I could use for defense. The night outside was no longer safe. And somewhere in the silence, I felt the anticipation of the hunt begin to stir. The morning sun pushed through the curtains in thin, harsh lines, slicing across the floorboards like a warning. I sat up slowly, muscles stiff, and stared at the ceiling. The silence of the apartment was suffocating. I had planned to call the police, but what could I say? A list of names, a cryptic threat, and a smile that hid something so dark, how would they believe me? How could I prove anything when the whole street seemed to be in on it? The front door was locked tight, but it didn't feel like enough. I kept glancing at the peephole, half expecting to see Jim's face staring back, that same perfect smile twisted into something cruel. But the hallway was empty, bathed in the indifferent glow of the morning light. I forced myself out of bed, pulling on yesterday's jacket, and headed to the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled, a small comfort in a day that felt anything but. I needed to think, to plan, but the fog in my head made it hard to focus. The list was a puzzle, a map of intentions I didn't want to follow but had no choice but to. My phone buzzed on the counter, startling me. I reached for it, heart pounding, and saw a message from an unknown number. We're watching. Don't try to run. I swallowed hard, hands trembling. It was Jim, or someone like him. The message was a reminder, a leash tightening around my throat. But something inside me snapped then. Enough. No more running. No more hiding. If they wanted a game, I would play and I would win. I called the one person I hadn't dared to reach out to before, Sarah, my closest friend since childhood, the one who had always told me to trust my instincts. I needed help, and I needed it now. Her voice was steady on the other end, calm but sharp. You're not alone. We'll figure this out. I spent the morning recounting everything, the borrowing of bizarre items, the intrusive questions, the list, the threats. Sarah listened without interrupting, her silence heavy with understanding. We need evidence, she said finally. Something concrete we can take to the police. You can't fight them on your own. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. She was right. But where to start? That afternoon, I went back to the Miller's house, pretending to run an errand and hoping to catch something, anything that would expose them. I watched from across the street as Jim and his wife, Claire, moved with that same eerie precision, their smiles sharp and gleaming. I noticed a small camera mounted near their front porch, almost invisible against the siding but unmistakable once I spotted it. I realized then that they had been watching me all along, collecting details, studying my every move. The realization made my skin crawl. I slipped around to the side of their house, heart hammering, and found the small box where the camera feed was stored. The lock was flimsy, and after a moment's hesitation, I managed to pry it open with a screwdriver I carry for emergencies. Inside was a hard drive labeled with dates and times, hours and hours of footage. I grabbed it and slipped away before anyone could notice. Back at my apartment, Sarah arrived with a laptop and a recorder. Together, we started sifting through the footage. What we found made my stomach turn, hours of me coming and going, conversations I'd had in my own living room, even recordings of neighbors I barely knew. But there was more. The footage included secret meetings between Jim, Claire, and others in the neighborhood, people whose smiles had always seemed too wide, too perfect. They talked about keeping the streets safe, but their words were laced with menace, a chilling obsession with control and fear. As the sun set, we handed the hard drive and recordings to a detective Sarah knew from her work. He listened carefully, his face growing darker with every detail. "This is serious," he said. "We'll take it from here." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. Over the next few days, the police moved quietly but decisively. They questioned neighbors, searched homes, and uncovered a disturbing web of intimidation and surveillance. The Millers, along with several others, were arrested. The perfect street had been a facade for something far more sinister. The neighborhood changed after that. The oppressive silence lifted, replaced by cautious conversations and wary glances. Trust was fragile but growing, like tentative shoots breaking through cracked concrete. For me, the experience was transformative. I learned that evil didn't always wear a mask of horror, it often came dressed in familiarity and smiles. I had been afraid, yes, but I was no longer powerless. I started attending neighborhood meetings, determined to help rebuild what had been broken. I connected with other residents who had felt the same fear, the same isolation. Together, we forged a new sense of community, one rooted in vigilance and care rather than suspicion and control. Late one evening, as I locked my door and turned the key firmly in the lock, I felt a quiet strength settle inside me. The street was still quiet, but I no longer felt like prey. I was part of something larger now, a collective determined to protect one another. The list was gone, tucked away in a police file, a reminder of what had been but no longer what could be. My choices did matter. I did belong here, not because they said so, but because I fought to make it so. And in the end, that made all the difference. Story 3, Duplicate Intrusion, Unseen Doppelganger Access. The office was quieter than usual that Friday evening, the kind of quiet that settles after most people have left and before the cleaning crew arrives. I had been at this job for nearly 2 years now, a mid-level analyst in the security department of 𝐜𝐡𝐚𝐽. My role was mostly tedious, scanning through logs, cross-referencing access cards, flagging anomalies. The building was a fortress of glass and steel, with restricted areas cordoned off by biometric scanners and surveillance cameras that never seemed to blink. It was the kind of place where every door had a story, though usually nothing more interesting than a maintenance crew going rogue or a forgotten laptop left in a conference room. That night, I was tasked with reviewing the security footage from the West Wing, an area that housed sensitive client files and prototype materials. Most days, nothing unusual popped up, but earlier that week, a few minor discrepancies had shown in the access logs. Cards swiped out of sync or security doors left ajar for seconds longer than protocol allowed. I wasn't worried, just curious enough to dig a little deeper. The playback interface loaded quickly, and I leaned back, stretching my neck. I clicked through the timeline, watching the grainy black and white images flicker across the screen. The corridors were empty, sterile, the occasional janitor pushing a cart or a cleaning robot cruising past. Then, about halfway through the footage, something caught my eye. There I was. Or rather, someone who looked exactly like me. Dressed in my usual work clothes, navy slacks, a light blue button-up shirt, the little silver badge clipped to the collar, the figure stepped into frame near the entrance to one of the restricted rooms. It was the kind of room I wasn't authorized to enter, a place labeled Research Archives on the door. My heart skipped a beat. I watched as the figure swiped a card, the lock clicking open, and then disappeared inside. Confused, I rewound the footage and played it again. The timestamp showed it was well after hours, past 9:30 p.m., a time I was sure I'd spent glued to my desk, finishing reports and sipping lukewarm coffee. I pulled the access logs up on my second monitor and keyed in my ID. The results were contradictory. Every record showed I had remained at my workstation, no exits or movements recorded for the entire evening. I rubbed my eyes and leaned closer. The footage didn't show my face clearly, but the build and mannerisms were unmistakably mine. The figure moved with the same slow, deliberate gait I adopted when I was thinking, pausing briefly at the door, fingers brushing the edge of the card reader before swiping. Why would I have gone into the research archives? I had no reason to be there, and, more importantly, I had no memory of it. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I tried to recall the evening. Had I gotten up and wandered off without realizing? Maybe I'd been sleepwalking, or somehow confused about the time. But the log said otherwise. The building's security system was nearly foolproof, and the card readers were synced in real time. If I had physically left my desk, it would have registered. I clicked forward in the footage, watching as the figure rifled through cabinets, pulling out folders and what looked like a small box. The scene was surreal, like watching a stranger invade my own private space. Then, after a few minutes, the figure slid the drawer closed and replaced the folders exactly as they'd been. The door clicked shut, and the figure turned, heading back the way they'd come. I leaned back, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe it was a glitch in the footage or a hacked feed. Maybe someone was impersonating me, wearing a stolen badge or replicating my ID. But then I remembered the small detail I had overlooked. The badge clipped to the figure's shirt was mine, the real one I kept in my pocket. I checked my desk. The badge was still there, exactly where I'd left it at the start of the evening. My phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from my manager. "Lisa, don't forget the weekend reports due Monday." "Thanks." I forced myself to smile, typing back a quick acknowledgement, but the warmth didn't reach my eyes. The office suddenly felt colder, the shadows longer. I closed the footage and stared at the blank screen, the question spinning in my head like a broken record. How could I have been in two places at once? I tried to focus on the mundane, on the reports, the emails waiting for me in the inbox, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the footage. Who else could have accessed my badge? Was someone watching me? Had I been set up? I glanced around the empty office, the rows of cubicles stretching into darkness. The building felt different now, unfamiliar and hostile. That's when I noticed the time, midnight. The cleaning crew would be here soon, and the lobby cameras would switch to a reduced recording mode. If I wanted answers, I have to act fast. I stood, the chair creaking beneath me, and walked toward the security room down the hall. The keypad beeped as I entered the code, and the room was a cavern of monitors, each flickering with live feeds from every corner of the building. I sat back down and pulled up the footage again, this time focusing on the moments before the figure entered the research archives. There, in the corridor, was a shadow moving just out of frame, something or someone waiting. I leaned closer, heart pounding. The figure turned, and for a brief second, the camera caught a glimpse of a face, partially obscured but unmistakably human. I wasn't imagining it. And whatever was happening here wasn't over. I didn't sleep. I settled in my chair, eyes already drawn to the dual monitors that now felt less like tools and more like traps. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. I'd spent hours last night scouring the footage, but now I needed something more, something concrete. If there was a human face lurking in the shadows, I had to find out who. The building's access logs were the first place I turned. Security had been kind enough to grant me temporary read-only access after I explained the badge confusion to Lisa. The log showed something strange. At no point during the night was my ID used to open any restricted doors. According to the system, I had been sitting at my desk, exactly where I remembered being. Yet the footage told a different story. I pulled up the timeline again, this time narrowing the window to the 30 minutes before the figure entered the research archives. The hallway camera caught me, or someone wearing my badge and clothes, walking calmly down the corridor, badge clipped to the shirt pocket, hands tucked into the jacket. The figure paused at the door, glanced around as if checking for witnesses, then slipped inside. I blinked, leaning back. How was this possible? If the log said I never left my desk, why did the camera show me moving through restricted areas? I rewound and played the clip repeatedly, looking for any sign of tampering, any glitch that might explain the anomaly. Nothing. The footage was clean, clear, and damning. Then I noticed something else. Just before I, or whoever it was, entered the archives, the camera caught a faint reflection in the polished floor tiles. Another figure, crouched near the corner, watching. I zoomed in, but the image was grainy, the face obscured by shadows and a hood. The posture was deliberate, patient, waiting for the moment I passed. My phone vibrated on the desk. I glanced down. A message from Mark, one of the tech guys I trusted since I started here. It read, "Got a minute? Heard you were poking around security footage. Something weird happened last night. Call me." I hesitated but hit call before I could second guess myself. Mark's voice was low, cautious. "Look, I don't want to spook you, but I checked the access controls overnight. The system logs are clean, like you said. But the building's physical sensors, motion detectors, door pressure plates, they recorded movement where there shouldn't have been any. Near the archives, between midnight and 12:30. Whoever was there didn't badge in. It's like they bypassed everything." Bypassed? I repeated, heart thudding. Yeah. We're talking about someone who knows the system deeply. Someone with inside access or serious hacking skills. I don't think it's random. I swallowed. The thought of someone moving unnoticed inside the building, wearing my badge or looking like me, sent a cold rush through my veins. Was I being targeted? Framed? Or worse, was there someone else here, impersonating me for reasons I couldn't yet understand? I thanked Mark and ended the call, then opened the company directory. The only people with that level of access were a handful of senior staff, including Lisa, the head of IT, and the security manager, Tom. Lisa was helpful, yes, but I'd noticed her glance at me a little too long during our last meeting. Tom was distant, his expression guarded whenever I passed the security office near the lobby. I decided to confront Tom next. If anyone could explain the impossible footage and the silent intruder, it was him. I found Tom in the security office late that afternoon, surrounded by monitors and a clutter of coffee cups. He looked up when I knocked. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk about last night? The footage and the badge issue?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've been expecting you. Look, I'm not sure what's going on, but the building's been on edge lately. There have been reports of unauthorized entries, strange glitches in the badge readers. We're tightening security, but it's like someone's always one step ahead. Do you think someone's using my ID to get around?" I asked. He hesitated. "It's possible. Whoever it is knows the system well. But there's something else." He pulled a flash drive from his desk drawer and handed it to me. "We pulled extra footage from the hidden cameras, those not on the public feed. Take a look. It might shed some light." Back at my desk, I plugged in the drive. The files played almost immediately. The grainy black and white footage showed the same corridor outside the research archives, but from a different angle. The figure wearing my badge appeared again, but this time I saw the face more clearly. The camera flickered, but for a moment, the figure looked directly into the lens. It wasn't me. A chill crept up my spine. Whoever this was had gone to great lengths to mimic me, down to my clothes, my badge, even my mannerisms. But the eyes, the slight hesitation in the stride, betrayed them. I paused the video and zoomed in on the face. Recognition hit me like a punch to the gut. It was David. David, the quiet guy from accounting who had always sat 2 desks down but never talked much. The one who'd always seemed a bit too interested in my work, asking questions that felt innocent but now seemed calculated. I closed the footage, my hands trembling. If David was behind this, what did he want? And how deep did this go? A knock on the glass startled me. Lisa stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Working late again," she said, voice light but with an edge. I hesitated, then nodded. "Found something. You need to see this." She stepped inside, her gaze flicking to the screen. I played the clip. Her face tightened, and for the first time, I saw something like fear. "David? That's unexpected. Do you know something?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Maybe. But if David's involved, this isn't just about stolen badges or security breaches. There's more at stake here." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You need to be careful. Whoever's doing this doesn't want to be found." The fluorescent light flickered again, and the monitors blinked out one by one, plunging the room into darkness. The backup generator kicked in moments later, but the damage was done. In the brief blackout, I felt eyes on me watching, waiting. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The moment Lisa left, I sat back in the chair, staring at the darkened monitors. I told myself it was just paranoia. But the idea that David was impersonating me, sneaking around the office after hours, was unsettling. What was he after? And how had he gotten access to my badge? The next morning, I arrived early, the building still quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. Lisa was at her desk when I got in. She looked up, eyes tired but alert. Morning. Any luck with the footage? I shook my head. I went over it again. The impersonation's real, but there's more. I found clips where Mia's opening rooms I don't remember visiting. Restricted areas. Labs that require special clearance. Lisa frowned. And you don't remember going there? No. And the weird part, the access logs say I never left my desk during those times. Her eyebrows knitted together. That's impossible. I nodded. Exactly. I double-checked the logs. No badge scans anywhere except my desk area. But the footage shows me, or someone who looks exactly like me, walking through these secure doors, fiddling with files, even pulling out drawers. Lisa leaned back, crossing her arms. So either the footage is doctored or someone has found a way to fake your badge and appearance perfectly. David, I said quietly. He was the one on the footage. She looked at me sharply. You said he never talked much. Did you ever catch him near restricted areas before? No. But I never really paid attention to him until now. I paused. I thought maybe we should check the security feed from the main entrance. See when he got in and out. Maybe he has an accomplice. Lisa nodded slowly. Good idea. I can pull the logs from the building's entry system. But be careful. If David's been impersonating you, he's more dangerous than we thought. The rest of the day passed in a blur of security footage, access logs, and whispered conversations. Lisa and I compared notes obsessively, cross-referencing timestamps with employee schedules. The more we dug, the more inconsistencies we found, not just with David, but with other employees who had convenient gaps in their access records. Around 7 p.m., after hours, I was alone in the security room again. The hum of the machines felt louder now, oppressive. I decided to watch the footage from the night before the blackout, hoping for a new angle. As I scanned the timeline, a shadow moved in the corner of the frame, someone I hadn't noticed before. The figure slipped through the hallway, moving confidently toward the archives. The camera angle was poor, but the shape was unmistakable. David. I froze the frame, zooming in. His face was partially obscured by the hood of his jacket, but the badge was clipped to his belt. The difference was subtle. He wasn't wearing it the same way I did. This wasn't just impersonation. This was deliberate disguise. I leaned forward, heart pounding. The footage showed him pulling out a small device from his pocket, something that looked like a card reader. He waved it in front of the panel next to the door, and it clicked open. I swallowed hard. That's not possible, I muttered. Those doors use biometric scanners. Lisa's voice crackled over the radio I'd forgotten I was holding. What's going on? I didn't answer right away. I rewound the clip and played it slower. The device flashed briefly, then the door unlocked. I hit pause and took a screenshot. This guy's got some serious tech, I said finally, voice low. And he's been inside labs we're not supposed to access. Lisa's reply was grim. We need to tell security. Now. I hesitated. If he's this skilled, maybe security's compromised too. There was silence on the other end. Then, I'll come up there. The minutes stretched thin as I waited. Then the door creaked open. Lisa stepped in, her face pale. You need to see this. She handed me a tablet. On the screen was a list of access logs, timestamps, employee IDs, door entries. But one column stood out, anomalies. Several entries flagged as suspicious, including mine and David's. Look here, Lisa said, pointing to the timestamps matching the footage. Your badge was used to enter rooms, but the logs say you were at your desk the whole time. Either the system's been hacked, or someone's found a way to clone your credentials. I swallowed hard. Or both. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop looking. You don't know what you're messing with. I looked up sharply. Did you get that? Lisa nodded. Me too. This just got a lot worse. I felt the weight of the building pressing down around us, the flickering lights casting long shadows. Someone was watching, and they knew exactly how far we'd gotten. We had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The question was, how much more were they willing to reveal before they decided to stop us? I swallowed hard, eyes scanning the dim corridor ahead. We need to keep moving. If they're watching, staying here isn't safe. Lisa glanced at the cracked ceiling, her voice barely a whisper. Every step feels like walking deeper into a trap. But traps could be outsmarted. We just had to stay one step ahead. I nodded, tightening my grip on the flashlight. Shadows shifted around us, but we pressed forward, hearts pounding in sync with the distant hum of unknown machinery. The office was quieter than it should have been the next morning. I sat back down at my desk, the tablet still warm in my hands from last night's revelations. The access logs. The footage. My face staring back at me from restricted areas, places I had no memory of entering. It was like watching someone else's nightmare play out, someone who looked exactly like me. But according to the system, I'd never left my chair. I wasn't sure if I was more terrified by the footage or the logs. The evidence was impossible to reconcile. My mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of it, but there was no logical explanation. Not yet. The phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Keep digging. They're closer than you think. I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. How did they know? How had they been watching us all this time? It wasn't just a hack, it was a game, and we were the pieces being moved on a board I couldn't yet see. Lisa's words echoed in my mind. Compromised security, cloned credentials. Whoever was behind this had access deeper than we suspected. And if they could fake my presence, they could fake anyone's. I had to know more. I had to find out what I'd done during those blackouts. I pulled up the security footage again, scrubbing through the timestamps when the anomalies appeared. The figure that looked like me moved with purpose, entering labs and storage rooms, rifling through cabinets, sometimes stopping to fiddle with equipment. But what was most disturbing was the calmness in those movements, as if I were on a mission, cold and calculated. One clip showed me standing in front of a locked door, pulling something from my pocket. A small device, blinking faintly. It was the same strange tech I'd seen the night before on the screen, a device that could manipulate the locks. I'd never seen it before, never touched anything like it. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the creeping dread that was tightening around my chest. The sudden buzz of my phone made me jump. A video file this time. I hesitated, then pressed play. The grainy footage showed a man wearing a lab coat but with a face obscured by shadows, speaking into a phone. The audio was muffled, but I caught a few words. He's getting close. If he realizes what's missing, we lose everything. A door slammed somewhere off screen. The man's voice dropped to a whisper. Make sure he doesn't remember. The security logs will show he never left his desk, but if he starts asking questions. The screen went black. I slammed the tablet down on my desk, heart hammering. Someone was deliberately erasing my memory. They had been controlling my actions. But why? What was so important that they needed me to lose myself? I glanced up. The office door was ajar. A cold draft brushed against my neck. I wasn't alone. "Lisa?" I called out, voice tight. No answer. I stood, flashlight in hand, and moved cautiously toward the door. The corridor stretched ahead, dim and silent except for the faint hum of the building systems. My breath caught when I spotted a figure slipping into the stairwell at the far end. I hurried after them, but the door to the stairwell slammed shut before I could reach it. I pounded on it. "Wait. Lisa? Who's there?" No response. Panic prickled my skin. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. I was alone in the building again. Or worse, someone else was here, and they were playing with my mind. I returned to my desk, desperate for answers. I started cross-referencing the security logs with the footage again, searching for any pattern I might have missed. Then I noticed something odd. The timestamps on the footage didn't match the system clock. They were running a few minutes ahead. I adjusted the settings and watched again. In the corrected timeline, my doppelganger was entering the labs not just at odd hours, but during moments when Lisa and I had been in meetings, or even when I was supposed to be on a conference call. That meant someone else had been impersonating me, using my credentials, my face, everything. But how? And why? As the pieces fell together, a chilling thought took hold. This wasn't just about data theft or sabotage. It was about control. About erasing who I was. My phone buzzed again. "You're running out of time." I looked up sharply. The lights flickered violently, then went out, plunging the office into darkness. A whisper of movement came from the shadows near the stairwell. I swallowed hard, gripping my flashlight tighter. The game was no longer about discovery. It was about survival. And whatever was coming for me was already inside the building. A cold sweat broke out along my spine as the beam from the flashlight cut through the blackness, landing on a figure just beyond the doorway. The silhouette paused, then stepped forward, a slow, deliberate approach that made every nerve scream in protest. My breath hitched. No sudden moves. I scanned for an escape route, but the stairwell was blocked. The message on my phone echoed in my mind, "You're running out of time." Whatever this was, it wasn't just waiting, it was hunting. The figure's eyes gleamed faintly, locking onto mine with a chilling intensity. The figure didn't move any closer. I fumbled with the flashlight, heart hammering, hands slick with sweat. A faint click, then a sudden surge of light. The figure was gone. Silence settled, thick and suffocating. My phone buzzed again, but this time no message. Just static, then a low, mechanical hum before it powered off. I was cut off, alone and in the dark. I forced myself to breathe, to think. The building's security system was compromised. Whoever had been using my face on the footage, my doppelganger, wasn't some ghost or glitch. It was a person. And that person was still here. I had to get out. But the stairwell was blocked, as I'd seen. I edged toward the elevator lobby, hoping the emergency power had kicked in there. Flickering lights revealed the panel dead. No power, no escape that way. Then I remembered the fire exit signs. Dim, but illuminated. I moved toward the back of the floor, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows like a knife. At the emergency stairwell door, I found it locked electronically. I pulled at the handle, no give. Then, from my pocket, I pulled the security card Lisa had given me earlier for emergencies. My hand shook as I slid it through the reader. A hesitant beep, then a click. The door unlocked. I didn't stop to wonder if I was being led into another trap. I pushed the door open and plunged into the stairwell, the stale air thick with dust and old paint. Down I went, the echo of my footsteps loud in the narrow shaft. When I reached the ground floor, the heavy exit doors were unlocked, swinging open to the night air and the distant hum of the city. Relief flooded me, but I stayed alert. Whoever was inside could have followed. Outside, I called Lisa again. No answer. I debated going to her apartment, but something told me not to. Instead, I headed straight home, keeping to well-lit streets, eyes starting to every shadow. At home, I locked the door behind me and sank into the couch, heart still racing. I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the office network remotely. The connection was spotty, but I managed to access the security logs again. What I found chilled me. Someone had been manipulating the footage timestamps, tampering with access logs, creating false trails. The impersonator wasn't just a random intruder, they had intimate knowledge of our systems. Someone inside. I thought about Lisa. No one else had access to her security card, but she'd been unreachable since last night. Could she be involved? No, that didn't feel right. But what if she was being coerced? Or worse, what if she was the one tampering with me, trying to erase me? I called her one last time. This time, the call connected. Her voice was shaky. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want you to find out this way." "What do you mean?" I asked, heart pounding. She took a shaky breath. "It's Mark, our supervisor. He's been manipulating the data, covering up his tracks. He found out I was snooping around, so he threatened me. I thought if I helped him frame you, it would keep me safe." The pieces fell into place. The doppelganger footage, the false timestamps, the locked stairwell, all part of a setup to discredit me, to remove me from the equation without raising alarms. "I'm coming to the office," I said firmly. "We need to get proof." "No," she pleaded. "It's too dangerous. Mark's watching everything." But I couldn't wait. I needed to confront this head-on. The next morning, I returned to the office with Lisa. The air was thick with tension. We moved quickly, accessing the servers and cross-referencing the logs. Lisa's hands trembled as she worked, but together we uncovered encrypted files. Mark had hidden evidence of financial fraud, data manipulation, and the entire scheme to frame me. Just as we were about to leave, Mark appeared in the doorway, face pale but eyes hard. "I knew you'd come," he said coldly. "But it's too late. The board's already been notified. You're done here." I stood my ground. "Not until I expose you." The confrontation was tense, but we had the proof. Mark's threats fell apart beneath the weight of the evidence. The board suspended him pending investigation, and I was cleared. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to piece myself back together. The experience left scars deeper than I'd imagined, trust shattered, my sense of self shaken. But I found strength in the truth, and in Lisa's quiet support. We rebuilt what had been broken, not just professionally but personally. Looking back, the horror wasn't the darkness or the shadows. It was the betrayal, the idea that someone could wear your face, use your name, and try to erase you without a trace. I learned that survival wasn't about fleeing the unknown, but facing it. About reclaiming your story, even when it feels like everything is against you. And in that, I found a kind of peace. The office was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of resilience, a reminder that even when the worst happens, you can still stand, still fight, still be yourself. Every scar became a lesson, every challenge a step forward. I wasn't just surviving, I was becoming stronger, shaping my future on my own terms. The hum of the fluorescent lights above no longer grated on my nerves. Instead, it underscored the rhythm of my determination. Each keystroke, each phone call, each meeting was a small victory, a testament to how far I'd come. colleagues who once seemed distant now offered nods of respect, subtle acknowledgments of the change they witnessed. I learned to set boundaries, saying no without guilt, prioritizing my mental health alongside my workload. It wasn't easy. Old doubts whispered in the quiet moments, but I met them with the steady resolve I'd cultivated. Sometimes, I caught myself smiling during the chaos, a quiet rebellion against the shadows that had once threatened to consume me. Outside the office, life began to feel fuller, too. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, rediscovered hobbies that had slipped away, and allowed myself to dream again. The weight of survival transformed into wings of possibility. Looking back, I understood that the journey wasn't about reaching a destination, it was about embracing the ongoing process of growth. And with every step, I chose courage over fear, hope over despair. Because in reclaiming my story, I found not just peace, but a future worth fighting for. Story 4, Counting to Doom, Trapped in the Elevator. The fluorescent buzz of the office had thinned out to a dull hum by 11, leaving the late shift cloaked in a kind of quiet that felt too heavy for a place designed for constant motion. The elevator doors slid open with a clinical whoosh, and I stepped inside, pressing the lobby button without a second thought. The panel glowed softly under my fingers, and I watched the little arrow begin its descent. There was something comforting about the predictable routine, the steady, mechanical rise and fall of the elevator car, the way the floors passed by in sequence like the pages of a well-thumbed book. As the doors closed behind me, I noticed a man already inside. He hadn't been there when I arrived. He was standing near the back, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the floor like he was weighing some invisible burden. His clothes were unremarkable, a dark jacket over a plain shirt, jeans, but there was something off about the way he held himself, like he was trying not to be noticed but failing in small, twitching movements. I nodded a quick hello, expecting nothing in return. Instead, he glanced up briefly, eyes sharp but cautious. There was a twitch at the corner of his mouth, maybe a half smile or a grimace, I couldn't tell. He said nothing, and neither did I. The elevator began its descent, smooth and predictable. Floor after floor ticked by on the digital display, and I felt myself relax, the tension of the day ebbing away with each passing level. Then, without warning, the elevator shuddered, a sudden jolt that sent a brief ripple of panic through me. The lights flickered, and the car lurched to a stop between the 7th and 8th floors. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the emergency lights. I pressed the button for the lobby again, but the panel was unresponsive. The man beside me exhaled sharply, and for the first time, I noticed the way his fingers twitched rhythmically, curling and uncurling as if counting something only he could hear. "Looks like we're stuck," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'll call for help." I hit the emergency phone button, but the line was dead, nothing but static. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. "Not just stuck," he whispered, voice low and steady, "trapped. And no one's coming for you." I froze. The words slipped out so quietly, like a secret shared in the dark, but they slammed into me with the weight of a hammer. I forced myself to meet his eyes. There was no mistaking the intent behind that calm, measured tone. He began to count under his breath, slow and deliberate, 1, 2, 3, each number a soft pulse that seemed to echo against the metal walls. The space between us shrank, and the air thickened with something sharp and suffocating. I swallowed hard, searching for any sign of a crack in his expression, any hint that this was some kind of sick joke. But his gaze was cold, focused, and unblinking. I was no longer just a stranger sharing an elevator. I was the target of a silent countdown that promised something terrible. The emergency lights flickered again, and the elevator felt smaller, colder, a cage closing in. I wanted to move, to say something, anything, but my voice caught in my throat. The man's whispered threats were not loud, but they carried a weight that pressed down on me, making the air tremble with danger. In that moment, I realized this was no ordinary breakdown. The night had shifted, and I was caught in its tightening grip. The man beside me was not just nervous, he was planning, waiting, and I was the reason. And the countdown had only just begun. I forced my eyes to focus on the faint glow of the street lamp outside, tracing the flicker of shadows that danced on the cracked pavement. Time stretched thin, each second dragging like weight on my chest. The sound of his breath, uneven and ragged, filled the cramped space between us, a sinister metronome counting down to something I dared not guess. My mind raced, searching for an escape route, a detail I might have missed. The door behind me was inches away, yet moving toward it felt like breaking through a wall of thick, invisible glass. His hand twitched near his pocket, a subtle gesture that sent a jolt through me. I had to stay calm, to keep my movements slow and deliberate. Panic might be the spark that ignited the powder keg. My fingers found the small, worn pendant hidden beneath my shirt, something I didn't even realize I'd been clutching until now. It was a reminder of who I was, where I came from, and, perhaps, a tether to hope in this suffocating darkness. The man's murmur shifted, words slipping out in a harsh cadence I barely caught. They weren't threats anymore, they were promises, contracts sealed in shadows. I understood then the breadth of his resolve. Whatever he planned, it wasn't just about me. It was about leverage, control, a game with stakes higher than my own survival. A sudden noise outside made us both freeze. Footsteps, distant but growing louder, crunching on gravel. The man's head snapped toward the door, eyes narrowing with a dangerous intensity. I pressed myself as far back as I could, heart hammering against ribs that felt ready to shatter. The countdown was no longer metaphorical, it was real. And with each approaching step, the walls of my cage grew smaller still. The footsteps stopped just outside the elevator doors, sharp and deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Who's there?" a voice called out, low and cautious. The voice was unfamiliar, but it broke the spell of stillness. The man's whispered counting stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense quiet between us. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Help! We're stuck." The response was muffled, but the relief in it was unmistakable. "Hang tight. Maintenance is on the way." The footsteps retreated with the same quiet urgency, leaving us alone again, trapped in the claustrophobic box with only the hum of the stalled elevator and the man's uneven breathing. Minutes passed, each one a slow drumbeat of dread. The man's whispers resumed, but this time, they weren't random numbers. He was naming times, exact minutes, hours. 3 minutes to midnight. 45 seconds. 22. His voice was barely audible, but the precision was chilling. He wasn't just nervous, he was counting down to something, and I was the center of his focus. I tried to keep my tone steady, to reach whatever part of him wasn't consumed by whatever dark plan he had. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" His eyes flicked to mine, hard and cold. "You don't remember, do you? You should. We had a deal." His hand emerged slowly from his pocket, revealing a folded piece of paper. "This is what you owe." My heart skipped. The paper looked old, edges worn and creased. I hadn't seen it before, but the weight of it felt familiar, like a debt unpaid or a promise broken. My mind scrambled. Had I missed something in the chaos of my life, some connection to this man that explained the twisted game I was caught in? "Look, I don't know what this is about," I said, trying to buy time, to calm the growing panic. "But whatever it is, we can figure it out. I don't want trouble." He smiled, then a slow, bitter curl of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Trouble found you the moment you stepped in here. You just didn't know it yet." His fingers brushed the paper again, then folded it back into his pocket. Time's running out. The elevator shuddered slightly, a mechanical groan that reminded me of our precarious position. The emergency light flickered, casting harsh shadows across his face, making him look even more like a man teetering on the edge. Then, from somewhere beneath the floor, a faint vibration pulsed, a subtle thrum that set my teeth on edge. The man's eyes narrowed. "They're coming," he whispered, more to himself than to me. I wanted to ask who, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I focused on the pendant I still gripped beneath my shirt. It was warm against my skin, a small anchor in the storm of fear and confusion. "Why me?" I finally managed. "Why now?" His gaze softened for the briefest second, almost human. "Because you're the key. And they know it too." Suddenly, the elevator jolted violently, the lights flickering out entirely. Darkness swallowed us whole, broken only by the faint glow of emergency lights kicking in. The man's whispered counting stopped as he pressed his back against the wall, eyes scanning the cramped space. "Listen," he said, voice low and urgent. "We don't have much time. When the doors open, you need to move fast. Don't trust anyone." I nodded, heart pounding so loud I thought it might betray me. The air was thick with tension, the kind that tightens your throat and leaves everything sharp around the edges. Then, a sudden metallic clank echoed through the shaft, followed by a grinding noise. The elevator shuddered again, and the doors began to slide open, slowly, agonizingly, revealing a dimly lit corridor beyond. The hallway was empty, silent except for the distant hum of the building's night machinery. The man's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. "Wait." His eyes locked onto mine. "Not yet." A shadow moved at the far end of the corridor, a figure, just a silhouette in the faint light. My breath caught. The man's grip tightened. "Who is that?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled me back into the elevator as the doors slid almost closed, leaving the corridor and the shadow just out of reach. "We're not safe," he said, voice hollow. "Not until this is over." The doors sealed shut with a final clang. The elevator lurched into motion, descending into the unknown. And I realized, with a sinking certainty, that the nightmare was only beginning. The elevator's hum filled the cramped space, a steady drone that did little to calm the pounding in my chest. Outside, the faint glow of the corridor vanished, swallowed by the metal walls that now felt more like a cage. I pressed my back against the cold panel, trying to steady my racing thoughts. "Who was that?" I asked again, voice barely audible. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know." Someone from the past, or maybe the future. Someone dangerous. A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to ask more, but the elevator jolted and slowed, then stopped. The doors slid open to reveal a dimly lit basement, cluttered with crates and forgotten machinery. "We have to keep moving," he said, gripping my arm firmly. "They're watching, waiting for us to slip." Every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified in the stillness. As we stepped out, I realized this was no longer just about escape, it was a desperate race against time, and we were already behind. The stale air of the basement settled around us as we moved cautiously through the maze of crates and machinery. We slipped past rusted shelves and stacks of forgotten boxes, the dim yellow light flickering overhead casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to breathe. "Where exactly are we?" I whispered. "What is this place?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the area, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. Finally, he spoke, voice low and careful. "This part of the building, it's been sealed off for years. Maintenance never comes down here anymore. It's like a forgotten world beneath the working floors." I swallowed hard. Why bring me here? His eyes met mine, dark and unreadable. Because whatever is hunting us, it knows you. That stopped me cold. Knows me? How? Before he could answer, a faint metallic click echoed from the far end of the room. We froze. The sound was subtle but unmistakable, like a lock being disengaged. My skin prickled with dread. It was too quiet, too deliberate. He pulled me against a crate, pressing his back to the cold metal. Stay close, he hissed. They're coming. I wanted to protest, to demand explanations, but the urgency in his tone silenced me. We crouched in the shadows, straining to hear over the pounding of my pulse. Footsteps, slow, measured, approached from the darkness, accompanied by a faint whisper of fabric brushing concrete. The man's hand slid into his pocket and came out holding a small flashlight. With a flick, a narrow beam cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow corridor leading further into the basement. The footsteps stopped just beyond the edge of the light. We have to move, he said, voice barely above a breath. Now! I nodded, swallowing the knot of fear in my throat. We moved quickly but silently down the corridor, the flashlight's beam bobbing ahead of us. The air grew colder, damper, and the smell of rust and mold thickened. The walls closed in, lined with pipes that groaned softly as if complaining about our intrusion. Suddenly, he stopped and raised a finger to his lips. Listen. Through the pipework, a faint sound emerged, voices, muffled but unmistakable. Two men speaking in hushed tones, their words just beyond clear comprehension. I leaned closer, heart hammering. He won't talk. Not yet. The girl? We need her quiet. My stomach twisted. The girl. That could only mean me. The man's jaw clenched. They've been watching you longer than I thought. This isn't random. Who are they? I asked, voice trembling. Before he could answer, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness so complete it felt like swallowing a black hole. Panic rose like bile, raw and immediate. Stay calm, he whispered urgently. I have a backup. He pulled out a smaller light, and just as it clicked on, another sound shattered the silence, a heavy thud behind us, followed by the unmistakable scrape of metal on concrete. They found us, he said grimly. We spun around, the weak light revealing a figure stepping out from the shadows. Not the shadow from before, but someone new. A man, mid-30s, face shadowed by a baseball cap pulled low. His eyes gleamed with something cold, calculating. You shouldn't have come here, he said softly, voice laced with warning. The man beside me tensed, ready to defend, but I froze. Recognition spread through me like ice water. The stranger's eyes, dark, sharp, were the same ones I'd glimpsed in a photo on my desk weeks ago. The man I'd been warned about, the reason for the late-night shifts and hurried warnings from security. Why are you after me? I demanded, voice steadier than I felt. The newcomer smiled thinly. Because you know too much. Before I could ask what that meant, the man beside me shoved me behind him and lunged forward. The basement erupted into chaos, shouts, the clash of bodies, the scrape of shoes against concrete. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the violence, the betrayal, the fact that this nightmare wasn't just about being stuck in an elevator anymore. In the struggle, I caught a glimpse of a small device clipped to the other man's belt, a recorder, blinking red. Suddenly, everything shifted. You're recording this, I said, voice sharp. Why? The man nodded, breath ragged. Proof. Proof of what they're planning. And why they want you silenced. The cap-wearing man growled and pulled a knife from his jacket. The glint of steel froze me in place. Run, my companion hissed. Now! I didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged, and I bolted down the corridor, heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, more frantic. I burst through a door and found myself in a narrow stairwell, the emergency exit sign flickering weakly overhead. I scrambled up the stairs 2 at a time, desperate to put distance between me and the basement horrors. At the landing, I paused, gasping for breath. Then, the unmistakable metallic clang of the elevator doors opening echoed behind me. The man with the knife appeared, eyes blazing with fury. "Where do you think you're going?" he snarled. I backed against the wall, trapped between the stairwell's cold metal rail and the sinister man blocking the only way out. And then, from behind him, the man who had been with me in the basement stepped into the faint light. "This ends now," he said, his voice low but resolute. The 3 of us stood there, the hunter, the hunted, and the unexpected protector, poised on the edge of something I couldn't yet understand. Whatever was coming next, I knew there was no turning back. Because now, the nightmare had a face. And it was staring directly at me. The stairwell was a cage, cold and unforgiving, and I was trapped inside it with 2 men who might have killed me if either chose to. "Enough," the man with the recorder said, voice steady and low, though the strain in it was unmistakable. "You don't want to do this here." "Not now." The man with the knife laughed, a harsh sound that scraped against the bare concrete. "You think I care? After what you've done, after what you've betrayed. You're dead, both of you." His gaze flicked to me, sharp and sudden. "Especially you. You're the reason this all fell apart." My heart hammered as I took a hesitant step backward, still pressed against the rail. I could feel the cold metal biting into my palms. The man with the recorder moved forward, closing the small gap between them, his eyes never leaving the one with the knife. "Tell me what this is about," I said, voice trembling but louder than I expected. "Why am I the target? What did I see?" The man with the recorder glanced at me, then back at the other. "She doesn't know everything. But she's seen enough. Enough to put us all in danger. That's why he's here. To make sure she stays quiet." The man with the knife snarled, stepping in again, but the other man raised his hand, a silent command for him to wait. "You're making a mistake. This isn't just about her. It's about what this company is hiding. And I'm going to make sure the truth gets out." I swallowed hard. "What truth?" The man with the recorder hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled folder. "Evidence. Files, recordings, proof of illegal deals, cover-ups, things that go far beyond what you see on the surface. I was supposed to hand them over to the authorities, but I needed to be sure first. That's why I recorded everything. Why I kept close tabs on you. I thought you might be trustworthy." I felt a wave of nausea, the implications crashing over me. I'd been a pawn in something much bigger, something darker. The elevator stall, the whispered threats, the sudden violence, it all made sense now. I was caught in a web of lies and power plays that stretched further than I'd ever imagined. The man with the knife snarled again, his hand tightening around the hilt of the blade. "Trustworthy? You're all fools. This company will bury us if it has to. And you," he pointed the knife at me, "will be the first to disappear." "Stop." The man with the recorder's voice cut through the tension. "You're not going to win this. Not here. Not now. If you kill her, you lose the leverage. You lose your chance to control the narrative." For a moment, the man with the knife wavered, the rage in his eyes flickering with doubt. But then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "Then she stays with me. Until the deal is done." I stepped back, heart racing. The walls seemed to close in, the stairwell shrinking with every breath. My mind spun, desperate for a way out, but the trap was tight. The only way forward was through them, and both looked ready to fight to the death. Suddenly, the emergency exit door behind me creaked open. A figure appeared in the dim light, one of the night shift security guards, drawn by the noise. Relief surged in me, a brief flash of hope, but it was quickly snatched away. The man with the knife lunged, knife flashing in the weak light. The guard barely had time to react before the struggle erupted again, shouts echoing through the stairwell. I stumbled back, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst through my chest. The man with the recorder grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door the guard had come through. "Come on," he hissed. "We have to move. Now!" As we fled into the labyrinth of hallways, the sounds of pursuit trailing behind us, I realized this was no longer just a fight for information or survival. It was a race against something far more brutal, the kind of horror that wears a human face and carries a knife. And I was right in the middle of it. We rounded a corner, breath ragged, until we came to a dead end. The man with the recorder cursed under his breath, pressing his back against the wall. "They're closing in. We have to find another way." My mind raced. I could hear footsteps, closer now, the sound of breath, the scrape of shoes on tile. The man beside me checked his phone, no signal. "No help coming." "We're trapped," I whispered, panic creeping into my voice. He shook his head, eyes sharp. "Not yet. But we don't have much time." And then, from the shadowed end of the hallway, the man with the knife stepped into view, eyes glittering with cold triumph. "Game over," he said, voice like ice. Except it wasn't. Because as he advanced, a sudden, deafening crash echoed from above, metal twisting, the sound of something heavy falling. We all froze. And then the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed us whole. Heart pounding, I fumbled for my phone, desperate for a light. The faint glow revealed the knife-wielding man stumbling, disoriented by the sudden chaos. In the pitch black, a new figure moved swiftly, silent but purposeful. "Stay close," a whisper urged. We had one chance to turn this nightmare around. The air grew thick with tension as unseen footsteps closed in, breaths shallow and rapid. When the lights flickered back on, the hallway was a chaos of scattered papers, cracked tiles, and a faint, acrid smell of burnt wiring. The man with the recorder, whose name I now knew was Tom, had shoved the knife away during the blackout and wrestled the attacker down. I stayed frozen for a second, breath shallow, then moved to help, pressing my hand to the man's neck. No pulse. Tom's grip on the knife-holding arm loosened, and we both stepped back, trying to catch our breath. "It's over," Tom said, voice still tight but steadier. "At least for now." I nodded, though my hands trembled. Over wasn't how I pictured the end of this, no triumphant escape, no heroic rescue. Just a quiet, terrible stillness. The emergency alarm blared somewhere in the building, distant but growing louder, and footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Someone was coming. The security team, or maybe the fire department. We had to move before the police arrived and questions started. Tom grabbed my arm. "We need to tell them everything. The recordings, the threats, the whole twisted plan." I swallowed hard. The idea of recounting every detail, the stalking, the whispered threats, the knife, felt like dragging open a wound that was only just starting to close. But I knew he was right. What happened here wasn't just some random act of violence, it was planned. And if we didn't speak up, more people could be hurt. We found a stairwell door that wasn't blocked and made our way down, the emergency lights casting a sickly yellow glow. Each step felt heavier than the last, my mind spinning with what had come to pass in these past hours. The man who had targeted me, the man who had counted off seconds like a metronome before striking, he was gone now, but the fear lingered. Outside, the night air was sharp and cool, filling my lungs with a strange sense of relief. Police cars and ambulances swarmed the building's front entrance, their flashing lights painting the concrete in frantic blues and reds. I was led to a waiting officer, who gently took my statement. Tom did the same, producing the recorder and phone with their damning evidence. As the officers took over, questions came in waves about who the attacker was, what he wanted, and how we'd escaped. I answered quietly, the words tasting like ash. The details, the terror, the moments when I thought I wouldn't make it out alive, everything spilled out, raw and true. In the days that followed, the building was closed off. News reports filtered in about the attempted attack and the quick response that saved a life. I was offered counseling, which I hesitated to accept at first, but eventually said yes. I had to rebuild something inside me that felt shattered. The experience changed me. The elevator, once a mundane part of my routine, became a symbol of vulnerability and survival. I realized how close I had come to losing everything that defined me: safety, control, even hope. But I also learned something more profound. Fear had tried to silence me, to make me small and invisible. Instead, it ignited a quiet resolve. I wasn't just a victim, I was a witness to something dark, and I had the power to speak out. Tom and I stayed in touch, bonded by that night's ordeal. He was no longer just a coworker but an ally who understood the weight of what we'd faced. Together, we made sure the company improved security measures, installed better surveillance, and provided support for employees working late shifts. Most importantly, I began to reclaim my own narrative. I no longer let the shadow of that night dictate my days. I learned to breathe again, to trust the small moments of peace, and to carry the scars not as marks of failure but as symbols of endurance. The man who had counted every second before striking, he was behind bars now, facing justice for what he'd done. The nightmare hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer ruled me. I had survived. And in surviving, I found a strength I didn't know I had. With each passing day, the weight of that night grew lighter, not because the memory faded, but because I chose to meet it differently. I began to surround myself with people who saw me not as a victim, but as a whole person, flawed, resilient, and relentlessly human. They helped me rediscover joy in the mundane, the warmth of morning sunlight through a kitchen window, the taste of coffee shared with a friend, the simple rhythm of a walk through a park. These moments stitched together a new tapestry of life, one with threads of hope woven deliberately and carefully. Therapy became a space where I could unravel the tangled emotions that had clung to me so tightly. It wasn't a quick fix or a linear path. Some days were harder than others, but I learned to be patient with myself. Healing, I realized, was not about erasing the past but integrating it, acknowledging the pain while refusing to be defined by it. I found solace in writing, using the pages of my journal to translate confusion into clarity, anger into purpose, and fear into courage. Over time, I discovered that reclaiming my narrative meant more than personal recovery. It meant becoming an advocate for others who had endured similar darkness. Sharing my story, when I was ready, became an act of rebellion against silence and shame. It was a way to light a path for those still lost in the shadows, to tell them that survival is possible and that strength often emerges from the most unexpected places. The scars I carry are reminders not just of what was taken from me but of what I fought to keep, the essence of who I am. They whisper of resilience on days when I forget, and they ground me in my humanity. I no longer fear the future because I have learned that even in the aftermath of trauma, life holds space for renewal. Each morning is a testament to endurance, each breath a small victory, and each step forward a declaration that I am here, I am whole, and I am enough. Story 5, Hawthorne Asylum, Voices from the Forgotten Cells. I never expected to be standing in the middle of an asylum that had been shut down for over 40 years, the cracked linoleum beneath my feet crunching with decades of dust and debris. I had always been drawn to abandoned places. There was something about them, the way they held onto the shadows of their pasts, the stories locked away in cracked windows and sagging door frames. Hawthorne had been on my list for months, tucked into the back of my mind like a dark secret begging to be uncovered. I figured a few hours poking around wouldn't hurt. Just me, my camera, and the slow drip of time settling over broken beds and rusted wheelchairs. The air inside was thick and stale, smelling of mold and old wood. Faint shafts of light filtered through shattered windows, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like fingers across the walls. I moved cautiously, stepping over broken glass and old newspapers yellowed with age. The silence was almost complete, save for the soft hum of my flashlight and the occasional creak of the building settling. It felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I passed what used to be the nurse's station, the desk still cluttered with rusted tools and faded charts. The names on the papers were barely legible, but the dates caught my eye, mostly from the 1950s, the asylum's final decade. Some of the notes were clinical, others disturbingly vague. Patient shows signs of severe distress post-treatment, subject refuses to speak, no improvement after last procedure. I glanced away quickly, the weight of it sinking in. These weren't just stories or rumors, these were real people who had suffered here. As I moved deeper into the building, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, and the shadows thickened. I reached the east wing, where the walls were lined with narrow cells, each one small enough to make you feel claustrophobic just standing in the doorway. Most of the doors hung open now, rusted hinges squealing softly as I nudged a few with my foot. Inside the cells, remnants of old mattresses lay stained and crumbled, and in one corner, a faded smear of something dark and unidentifiable caught my eye. I swallowed hard and kept moving. I was about to turn back when I noticed something odd on the far wall. Scratched into the plaster, just beneath a peeling poster that had once warned patients about dangerous behavior, were letters crudely carved but unmistakable. I crouched down, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. "Help me." The message was scratched deep enough to catch the light, as if someone had clawed at the wall with desperate fingers. My breath caught. The idea of someone trapped here, even decades ago, sent a chill through me. But what really unsettled me was that the plaster around the carving looked fresher than the rest, barely cracked, as if it had been disturbed more recently. I scanned the hallway, half expecting to see someone. There was nothing but silence and the faint echo of my own heartbeat. My rational mind told me it was probably graffiti left by some other trespasser, maybe a prank or a warning. Still, the words felt like a trap, a lure. I pocketed my camera and moved on, trying to shake the growing unease. That's when I noticed the faint sound, a soft scrape, like nails dragging against concrete from somewhere deeper in the building. I froze, listening. It stopped as suddenly as it had started. Must be a rat, I told myself, though the sound had been too deliberate, too slow for that. I followed the noise cautiously, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The corridor narrowed here, walls closing in with chipped paint and rusted pipes sneaking overhead. At the end was a heavy metal door, half open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. My heart hammered again, but curiosity pushed me forward. I stepped inside, the cold air rushing up from the basement below. The scrape came again, softer this time, almost like a whisper. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I couldn't turn back, not yet. Something about this place was still alive, still watching, and I had just stepped into its shadow. And then I heard it clearly, the faint click of a lock snapping shut behind me. Panic surged through me as I whipped around, the beam of my flashlight darting wildly across the rough stone walls. The staircase was swallowed by darkness below, but I could feel the air grow colder, heavier, as if the basement itself were breathing. The echo of the lock's click reverberated, sealing me in. I swallowed hard and took a tentative step down, the wooden stairs creaking beneath my weight. Each step seemed to pull me deeper into some unseen abyss. The scrape, now mingled with a low, almost inaudible hum, guided me further. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, the beam caught on something, an old, rusted door set into the far wall, its surface scarred with scratches and faded symbols I couldn't decipher. I reached the bottom and moved toward the door, the whispering sounds growing louder, weaving into words just beyond comprehension. My fingers trembled as I traced the grooves on the door's frame. The air smelled of damp earth and forgotten memories. Something stirred behind the door, a pulse, a heartbeat syncing with my own. Summoning every ounce of courage, I placed my hand on the ancient wood and pushed. The door groaned open slowly, revealing a chamber bathed in a faint, unnatural light. Inside, shadows writhed and twisted, forming shapes that danced just beyond clarity. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a small, ornate box covered in intricate carvings. The whispering ceased abruptly. Silence pressed down on me, heavy and expectant. I stepped inside, drawn to the box as if it held the answers I didn't know I was seeking. My fingers brushed its surface, and a sudden warmth spread through me, as though the box itself was alive, waiting to reveal its secrets or its curse. The box was heavier than I expected, cold beneath my fingers despite the warmth that seemed to radiate in my chest. I didn't open the box. Instead, I pulled out my phone, clicking on the flashlight app to supplement my failing beam. The screen cast a pale glow that barely scratched the shadows curling in the corners of the chamber. I scanned the walls, hoping for any clue, something to explain what this place had been, what horrors might have been hidden behind these doors. That's when I saw it, a series of photographs pinned to the wall with rusted nails, their edges curled and stained with age. They were black and white, grainy, but unmistakable, the faces of patients and staff, some smiling, most not. The captions beneath were smudged, but a few names remained legible, scrawled in a shaky hand. One photo caught my eye in particular. It showed a man in a lab coat, standing beside a restrained patient. The patient's eyes were wide, terrified, and the man's smile was too sharp, too knowing. The caption read, Dr. Harrow, Chief of Experimental Therapies. The name echoed something I'd heard whispered in the rumors, stories passed around town about the worst abuses in the asylum's darkest days. I pocketed my phone and leaned closer to the photos, tracing the faint pencil lines of an old map pinned alongside them. It marked rooms and corridors, some crossed out, others circled in red ink. The notes were shorthand, barely legible: isolation wing, high risk, subject 12 unresponsive after treatment, observation post, restricted access. The map didn't match the layout I remembered, but it hinted at a hidden network of rooms and passages, places I hadn't yet discovered. A sudden noise made me freeze, a soft scrape against stone, coming from the far end of the chamber. My heart thudded painfully as I swung my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. Just the cracked walls and shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I shook my head, trying to steady my breath. I wasn't alone here, not really. The lock snapping shut behind me was no accident. Someone or something wanted me trapped. I stood and moved toward the far wall, running my fingers along the cold stone until I found a narrow seam. Pressing lightly, I felt the wall give way beneath my palm. A hidden door, cleverly disguised. My pulse quickened as I pushed it open. Beyond was a narrow corridor, lit faintly by flickering bulbs overhead. The air smelled of mildew and rust, but beneath that, something fouler, something metallic. My flashlight beam caught patches of dark stains on the floor, smeared and splattered in jagged patterns. Blood, old but unmistakable. I swallowed hard, stepping cautiously forward. The corridor twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the bowels of the asylum. I passed empty rooms, old patient wards stripped bare, their beds long gone, until I reached a heavy steel door, its surface pocked with rust and scratched with desperate marks. From beyond came a low moan, barely audible but unmistakable. I pressed my ear to the cold metal and the sound sharpened a voice, raw and ragged, whispering for help. Panic welled inside me, but something stronger pushed me onward. I had to know. I scanned the door for a handle or lock, finding a small slot at eye level, a narrow window covered with thick, cracked glass. Peering inside, I saw a tiny room, no bigger than a closet, with bare concrete walls stained dark. In the corner, a figure curled on the floor. My breath hitched. The person was alive, but barely. Their clothes were torn, their face pale and streaked with grime and tears. They looked up, eyes wide with terror and relief all at once. "Please," they whispered hoarsely, "help me." I wanted to reach through the glass, smash it, pull them out, but the slot was sealed tight. Desperation clawed at my throat. Who had done this? Who was still here, locking people away in these forgotten cells? A sudden noise behind me made me whirl around. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow, deliberate, and growing closer. I dropped to the floor, heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps stopped just beyond the hidden door. A voice, low and cold, hissed something I couldn't make out. Then the light flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, and switched on the flashlight app. The beam sliced through the black, illuminating the corridor, but the figure was gone. The door stood closed, unyielding. And in the silence that followed, I realized something worse than being trapped in an abandoned asylum was the knowledge that someone else was here with me, watching, waiting, and ready to strike. I had no idea what I'd stumbled into, but there was no turning back now. The asylum wasn't just a place of forgotten horrors. It was a trap, and I was its latest prisoner. My heart pounded as I pressed against the cold metal of the door, searching for any weakness. A faint whisper echoed down the hallway, too soft to be words, but unmistakably human. Shadows flickered at the edge of the light, teasing me with their elusive presence. I steeled myself, knowing the next move could be my last. I edged forward, careful to keep my breath shallow. The whisper came again, clearer this time, a broken plea for help, barely audible but urgent. I followed it down the corridor, each step echoing off peeling walls and cracked tiles. The air grew colder, the stench of mildew thickening, and with it, a creeping sense of dread. At the end of the hall, a door hung ajar, its frame splintered as if forced open recently. The voice seemed to come from inside. I pushed the door wider, revealing a small room lit by a flickering bulb swinging overhead. Inside, a figure slumped against the far wall, an emaciated woman, her eyes wide with terror. "Help me," she rasped, clutching a bloodied bandage around her arm. Her voice was fragile, but desperate. I hesitated. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford here, but leaving her meant ignoring the only human connection in this nightmare. Swallowing my fear, I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. Before I could say a word, the bulb above sputtered and died, plunging us into darkness. The whispering returned, louder now, surrounding us from every corner. The woman's grip tightened on my sleeve as icy fingers brushed against my neck. I realized then the asylum was alive, and it wasn't done with me yet. The darkness pressed in like a living thing, thick and suffocating. "Who are you?" I whispered, trying not to startle her more. "What happened to you?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. They're still here," she said, voice cracking. "The ones who run this place. You're not safe." I nodded slowly. Of course I wasn't. The signs were everywhere, hidden traps, strange sounds, the locked door I couldn't open. This wasn't some abandoned building left to rot. It was a carefully maintained prison. "Why are you still here? How did you survive?" I asked, feeling a flicker of hope that she might have answers. She swallowed hard, then whispered. I tried to leave. But they caught me. They don't want anyone escaping. Not ever. Her voice broke off as a sudden noise echoed from the hall, a faint, metallic scrape against the tile floor. Both of us froze. The whispering stopped. Did you hear that? I asked, heart hammering. She nodded, eyes wide. They're coming. We need to move. I glanced at the door, then back at her. I can't open it. We're trapped. She looked around the room, desperate. There's a vent. Maybe we can squeeze through. I followed her gaze to a rusted grate near the ceiling, barely visible in the dim light. It was small, but the woman was slight. Maybe she could manage. Before I could argue, she was already climbing onto a broken chair, reaching for the grate. It rattled ominously under her fingers, but it didn't budge. Help me, she urged. I placed my hands on the chair, steadying it. The metal groaned, and I winced, hoping it wouldn't attract attention. She twisted the grate free with a scraping sound that made my skin crawl. A thin shaft of darkness yawned above us. Go, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, then slid her body up and disappeared into the vent. I watched the grate rattle again as she crawled away, the faint scrape of her movement fading down the shaft. Then silence. I was alone. The door creaked suddenly, and I spun around, heart in my throat. A shadow slipped past the frame. I barely had time to react before a hand clamped over my mouth, dragging me backward into the dark. Shoo, a low voice hissed in my ear. Not so fast. The grip loosened slightly, enough for me to tug my arm free, but the figure was quick. I stumbled back, bumping into the wall. The faint light from my phone revealed a man's face, mid-30s, with hard eyes and a cruel smile. His clothes were tattered, but clean, as if he belonged here in a way I never would. You shouldn't be here, he said, voice cold. Nobody comes in and walks out. My mind raced. Was this one of the people she warned about? Was he responsible for the whispered voices, the traps? I backed away slowly, trying to think of something, anything, to say that might buy time. I'm just looking, I lied, voice steady despite the fear. I don't want trouble. He laughed, low and bitter. Trouble finds you. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the hallway, followed by the woman's voice, sharp and panicked. Run. Don't stop. The man's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. His face twisted in frustration. Without warning, he lunged forward, grabbing my arm again, pulling me toward the door. Come with me, he snarled. If you want to live. I had no choice but to follow. His grip was iron as he dragged me into the corridor, away from the room and toward the labyrinthine depths of the asylum. The whispering resumed, now a chorus of voices weaving through the broken halls, punctuated by distant footsteps and muffled shouts. As we moved, the man's expression softened just a fraction. You don't understand what this place is, he muttered. It's not just an asylum. It's a cage. For all of us. I glanced at him, searching for the humanity beneath the menace. Who are you? What do you mean, all of us? He hesitated, then said, We're survivors. People who got trapped here long ago. Some of us work for the ones who run it, the ones who keep the place alive. Others, we just try to stay alive. The weight of his words settled over me like a stone. This was no abandoned asylum. It was a prison in every sense. And I was caught in its gears. Suddenly, the man stopped, pressing me against the wall. Ahead, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall woman with a cold stare and a clipboard clutched in her hand. She looked at me with thinly veiled disdain. New arrival, she said, voice clipped. The man nodded. We found him with the girl. Her eyes flicked to the empty doorway behind us. She's gone. Took the vent route. A flicker of hope surged through me. If she escaped, maybe there was a way out. But the woman's next words crushed it. Good, she said, smiling thinly. Let's make sure he doesn't. Before I could react, two other figures stepped out from the shadows, lean, silent, and armed with makeshift weapons. The man muttered a curse and shoved me forward. We don't have time, he said. Follow me if you want to live. I had no choice but to obey, heart pounding wildly. The asylum's twisted corridor stretched before us, but now I understood there was no simple way out. Every step deeper was a step further into the nightmare. And somewhere, hidden in the darkness, the real horror waited. The air in the asylum was thick with cold and rot, seeping into my bones as we navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Who are you? I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. Why are you helping me? Or are you just using me? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stopped at a junction and pressed me against the wall, listening. I followed his gaze and saw the faint outline of figures moving at the far end of the corridor. Shadows flitted across the cracked walls like phantoms, but these were human, alive, watching. They'll hunt us down if they catch our scent, he muttered. The ones who run this place, they have eyes everywhere. You don't just stumble into the hospital and walk out. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling deeper in my chest. So, what happens if they catch us? He didn't flinch. You don't want to find out. We moved again, faster this time, weaving through the maze of rusted metal doors and broken tiles. The man's grip loosened slightly, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of something raw beneath his rough exterior, a flicker of desperation, maybe even guilt. What's your name? I asked, trying to anchor myself to something human amid the madness. Call me Mark, he said, voice low. Mark, I repeated. Why do you stay here? Why not run? He scoffed, but there was no humor in it. Run where? Outside is worse. Or worse enough. This place, it's a trap, but it's also a shelter. If you know how to play the game. Play the game? I echoed, my mind racing. What game? Before he could answer, a sudden noise cracked through the silence, a sharp, metallic clang echoed down a side hall. We froze. Mark's eyes darted toward the sound. They're close, he hissed. We need to split up. No, I said, panic tightening my throat. Not without a plan. He gave me a hard look. Plan? You think there's a plan? This place doesn't work like that. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, pounding closer. Mark grabbed my arm again and yanked me into a narrow passageway, the walls closing in like a coffin. The air was thick with dust and something fouler, sweat, fear, and something metallic. Blood, maybe. As we pressed forward, I noticed fresh stains on the floor, dark and sticky. Mark caught my eye and nodded grimly. Not all of us get out. We reached a small room, barely more than a closet, and Mark pushed me inside. The door creaked shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands trembling, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the black, illuminating a cramped space filled with rusted medical tools and yellow paper strewn about. Mark's voice whispered from the other side of the door. Stay quiet. Stay still. I crouched in the corner, heart hammering, listening to the approaching footsteps. They stopped just outside the door. I held my breath as a pair of boots shuffled back and forth, voices low and angry. "Where is he?" a harsh female voice demanded. Mark's voice was a growl. "He's not here." The woman spat a curse. "Don't lie to me, Mark." Mark's reply was cold and steady. "I'm not lying." There was a tense silence, then the footsteps retreated slowly. I exhaled, relief washing over me in waves. But it was short-lived. The door handle rattled violently, the wood groaning under the pressure. I pressed myself flat against the wall, every muscle tense. "Open up," the woman snarled. "I know you're in there." Mark's voice was steady but strained. "Go away." The handle stopped. Silence stretched, then the footsteps faded. After what felt like an eternity, Mark whispered through the door, "They'll be back soon." I forced my legs to move, pushing myself up. "We can't stay here." He jiggled the latch. "It's locked from the outside." Panic clawed at me. "Then what?" Mark's face appeared through the narrow window in the door, eyes dark with exhaustion and something else I couldn't place. "We find another way. But it's not just them we have to worry about." I frowned. "Who else?" He hesitated. "Some of the survivors aren't like me. They've changed. They don't want to help. They want to keep the asylum alive by feeding it." Feeding it? The phrase echoed in my mind, cold and cruel. Mark's gaze hardened. "People who come in. People like you. They trap them, break them, use them. It's how they survive. How the asylum stays dangerous." I swallowed hard. "So, the experiments, the torture, it's still happening?" He nodded. "Not by doctors. By survivors. By prisoners." A chill ran down my spine. The stories of brutal experiments had been the stuff of urban legend, but the truth was far worse. This place wasn't just abandoned, it was actively deadly, a hunting ground for those who'd made it their home. And now, I was prey. Suddenly, the door shook again. "Time's up," the woman's voice hissed from the other side. "Mark, open the door, or I'll break it down." Mark's eyes met mine one last time. "I'm sorry." Before I could ask what he meant, the door exploded inward. The force threw me back, my head hitting the cold concrete floor. The woman stepped inside, flanked by the two silent figures with weapons. Her smile was cruel, triumphant. "You should have run while you had the chance." Mark lunged at her, fists swinging, but they were quickly overwhelmed. One of the armed men grabbed him, dragging him away as he struggled and cursed. I scrambled to my feet, heart drumming wildly. The woman turned to me, eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. "Now, it's your turn." The room spun as the door slammed shut behind them. The whispers returned, louder this time, a swarm of voices circling me, promising only one thing: the nightmare was just beginning. The concrete floor beneath me was cold, unforgiving, and the sting on my forehead was a sharp reminder that I wasn't safe. Mark's voice echoed faintly in my memory, his eyes full of warning and regret. "Some of the survivors have changed." I'd seen it now, people twisted by years of isolation, violence, and desperation. They weren't victims anymore, they were predators. The woman stepped closer, flanked by the two men with weapons. Her voice was low, a silky threat. "You'll learn to play the game soon enough." I swallowed hard. But the truth I carried was different. I wasn't going down without a fight. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Why?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound calm. "Why do you do this? Why keep the asylum alive like this?" She paused, surprised by my question. Then, with a shrug that didn't reach her eyes, she said, because it's the only way to survive. Out there, the world doesn't care about us. Here, we have control. We have power. This place, it's not just a building. It's a kingdom. Her words hung in the stale air, a twisted truth. The asylum had become their refuge, their prison, and their hunting ground. And I was their latest prey. But I wasn't going to be a sacrifice. As the men shifted, tightening the circle, I spotted something, a thin pipe lying near the door frame. It was just out of reach, but I could stretch my leg toward it. I feigned weakness, dropping my weight and curling slightly, as if to give up. The woman's eyes narrowed, watching. Don't even think about it. But desperation sharpened my senses. When one of the men moved forward, stepping too close, I kicked out hard with my boot, catching the pipe and jerking it toward me. It clanged against the floor, loud in the silence. The men reacted instantly, but I had a moment. Grabbing the pipe, I swung it with every ounce of strength left in me. The first man staggered back, clutching his arm. The second lunged, and I jabbed the pipe at his chest, pushing him off balance. The woman shouted, but I was already moving, scrambling for the door latch Mark had warned was locked from the outside. My heart hammered as I twisted the rusted handle, praying it would give. It clicked. Freedom was a few steps away. I bolted through the doorway, adrenaline blurring the pain in my head and limbs. The hallway stretched before me, dark, broken, but open. I didn't look back. I ran. The asylum's corridors twisted like a maze, but I had Mark's warnings and the faint memory of the layout etched in my mind. I avoided the main halls where shadows lingered, sticking to narrow service passages and crumbling stairwells. Every sound was amplified, my breathing, the scrape of my boots, distant echoes that might have been footsteps. Behind me, I heard the crash of the door being torn open, the woman's voice rising in frustration. She's running. I pushed harder, ignoring the burning in my chest, the dizziness threatening to take me down. The exit was close, Mark had said so before it all went wrong. The old staff entrance near the boiler room could lead out to the overgrown grounds beyond. I reached the stairwell and descended quickly, the metal steps groaning underfoot. The smell of rust and mildew was overpowering here, but it was better than the suffocating presence of those others. At the bottom, I found the door just as I remembered, a heavy metal slab, warped and half ajar. I forced it open, the hinges screaming in protest, and spilled into the cold night air. Outside, the sky was dark but clear, the stars distant and indifferent. I didn't stop running until the asylum was a looming silhouette behind me, swallowed by the night. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath, the cold seeping through my clothes. My hands trembled, but I was alive. Mark wasn't. The weight of that truth crashed down on me harder than the fear ever had. I had come here looking for answers, a story to tell, a mystery to solve. Instead, I'd found a nightmare made flesh, people broken by a place that refused to let go. And now, I had to live with the knowledge that the asylum was still alive in the worst way possible. The next morning, I found a spot near the edge of town to call for help. The police had their doubts, as expected, but when I described the layout, the locked doors, the evidence of others still inside, they agreed to send a team. I didn't stay to watch. I couldn't. Months passed. The authorities conducted raids, uncovering hidden rooms and makeshift cells. Survivors were taken into custody, some pleading for mercy, others silent and unrepentant. The asylum's reputation was no longer just a legend, it was a documented horror. But for me, the scars ran deeper. I stopped chasing stories after that. The hunger for truth had nearly cost me my life, and I realized some places, some histories, were better left buried. Mark's face haunted my dreams, a reminder of the cost of curiosity and the fragility of trust. I began therapy, trying to piece myself back together. The nightmares didn't vanish overnight, but slowly, I learned to live with them. To carry the weight without letting it crush me. In the end, the asylum taught me something grim but vital. Survival wasn't just about escaping danger. It was about facing the darkness inside and choosing not to let it define you. I never returned to that place. The ruins swallowed by time and neglect held their secrets still. But I carry their echoes with me, a warning, a memory, a part of who I've become. And sometimes, when the night is still and the wind whispers through the trees, I remember Mark's words one last time. It's not just them we have to worry about. Because the real horror wasn't the asylum. It was what it did to the people it trapped and what they became in turn. I survived. But I was never the same. Story 6, Forgotten Funeral, Haunted by False Memories. I woke up that morning with the kind of tired that doesn't wash off with coffee or a shower. I shuffled into the kitchen, flicked the kettle on, and glanced at my phone. No notifications. No missed calls. Just the usual quiet that comes with living alone in a small, rented apartment on the edge of the city. I liked it that way, no distractions, no obligations beyond work and the occasional call from my sister. Nothing complicated. The day ahead was supposed to be straightforward. I had a couple of errands to run, then back to the office to finish a report. Routine. Normal. Safe. But when I opened the mail, something felt off. Mixed in with the usual handful of bills and junk was an envelope with my name on it, handwritten in a careful script I didn't recognize. It was unmarked, no return address. I hesitated before opening it, a strange flicker of unease crawling up my spine. Inside were 3 things: a crumpled receipt from a cafe I don't remember visiting, dated 2 weeks ago, a grainy photo showing me standing beside a casket at what looked like a funeral, and a screenshot of a text conversation between me and someone named Claire, arranging to meet after the service. None of it made sense. I had no memory of any of those events, no idea who Claire was, and certainly no recollection of attending a funeral. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the envelope slipping from my fingers onto the scratched wood. My heart thudded in a way that wasn't entirely about confusion. It was something deeper, an unsettling sense that a part of my life was missing, or worse, being rewritten without me. I scrolled through my phone, searching for any sign of Claire or messages about a funeral, but there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no calendar events. Just the usual clutter. I tried to dismiss it as a mistake, maybe someone was playing a prank, or it was a mix-up with the mail. But the photo was unmistakably me. I recognized the jacket I was wearing, the way I held my hands. It was too specific to be a fake. And the receipt, well, it was from a cafe across town I'd never been to, but the date matched the funeral photo. As I stared at the evidence, a cold knot of fear began to tighten in my chest. What if I had blacked out? What if something had happened to me that I couldn't remember? The idea felt both terrifying and impossible. I was careful, cautious. I didn't drink much, I didn't do drugs. I lived a quiet life, mostly in control. I tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered, stubborn and invasive. I told myself to focus on the day ahead, work, errands, normal things that would ground me. But even as I left the apartment, the image of that funeral kept replaying in my mind, like a film stuck on a single, haunting frame. Later, at the cafe I usually went to, I found myself scanning the room for anyone who looked familiar, anyone who might explain the mystery. But the faces were strangers, the conversations distant. I couldn't shake the sense that someone else had been walking around in my life, going to places I didn't know about, talking to people I'd never met. That night, as I lay in bed, the envelope and its contents spread out on the nightstand, I realized I had to find out what happened. Not just for my own peace of mind, but because the longer I ignored it, the more I felt like I was losing a grip on something essential, something that belonged to me, but was slipping through my fingers. And then, just before I drifted off, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. We need to talk. About what you don't remember. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't alone. And whatever this was, it was only just beginning. The message lingered on my screen, a silent pulse in the dark. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but my fingers wouldn't move. Who was this? How did they know there was something missing from my memory? The question spun in my mind, faster than I could catch. I wanted to believe it was a prank or a mistake, but deep down, I knew better. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster like a map. Maybe if I could piece together the fragments of the day that had slipped away, I'd find some clue. But every attempt to remember was like grabbing at smoke, intangible, elusive. Then, as if the universe was answering a silent call, my phone buzzed again. Another message, from the same unknown number, meet me at the old pier. Midnight. I debated for what felt like hours. The rational part of me screamed to stay safe, to ignore this and avoid whatever trouble it might bring. But the restless part, the part determined to reclaim what I'd lost, won. I slipped on my jacket, careful to keep my phone close, and stepped out into the cold night. The streets were empty, the city holding its breath. I moved quietly, shadows stretching long beneath flickering street lamps. The old pier was a place I hadn't visited since childhood, desolate now, forgotten like the memories I was chasing. When I arrived, the air was thick with the scent of salt and decay. A figure stepped out from behind a weathered crate, their face obscured in the dim light. "You don't remember because it's safer that way," they said, voice low but urgent. "But the past isn't done with you yet. Not by a long shot." I swallowed hard, the weight of their words settling over me. Whatever this was, it was bigger than I'd imagined, and I was already in its grip. The walk back from the pier was a blur, the cold air doing nothing to clear the fog in my head. By morning, my phone was practically glued to my hand. I stared at the screen, waiting for another message, some clue, anything. But the silence was just as loud. I sat down at the kitchen table, the dim light from the window casting long fingers across the scattered papers I'd pulled out the night before. The receipts, the photos, the texts, they still didn't make sense. I flipped through the photos again. There I was, standing near a casket, faces turned away or blurred. The funeral. A stranger's funeral, or at least someone I didn't know. I thought back to the messages, the ones from friends I hadn't recognized. A text from Sarah, my colleague, "Thanks for coming yesterday, it meant a lot." And from Mike, my neighbor, "Sorry I missed you, the wait was tough." None of these events registered in my memory. I'd been in a fog, or worse. My phone buzzed again. This time it was from an old contact I hadn't heard from in months, Mark. I hesitated, then opened the message. "Saw you at the funeral. You seemed out of it. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen, heart thudding. How did Mark know? How did he even recognize me there? I typed back, fingers trembling, "Funeral? What funeral?" No reply. I needed more. I had to understand what had happened during those missing hours, maybe days. I grabbed my laptop and started digging through my email, scanning for clues. Nothing unusual, just the usual flood of newsletters, work emails, and spam. But then a new notification popped up, an email from a local florist. "Thank you for your order. Delivery for funeral arrangements confirmed." The date was 2 days ago. My credit card had been charged. My name was on the receipt. I leaned back, breath shallow. Someone had used my identity while I was out cold. But why? And what had they done? The phone rang, jolting me upright. It was Sarah. "Hey, are you okay?" "We've been worried," she said, voice soft but urgent. "Sarah, what funeral?" I asked. There was a pause. "You don't remember?" "It was for Daniel." "You were there. You looked like you didn't know what was going on." "Daniel." The name was foreign to me. "He was a friend of yours?" "Yes." "From work?" "He died suddenly last week. Heart attack." I closed my eyes, trying to summon any memory. Nothing. The idea of attending a funeral for someone I barely knew and not recalling it was unsettling. "Why didn't you tell me you were out of it?" I asked. "I thought you just needed space." "But now I'm worried," she admitted. "You've been acting strange." Her concern hit me harder than I expected. Maybe I was more disoriented than I realized. After the call, I paced the small apartment, every shadow feeling heavier. The idea that someone had been living my life while I was unconscious gnawed at me. What else did they do? Who else knew? How far had this imposter gone? I decided to check my social media accounts. Scrolling through the past few days, I found posts I didn't remember making, photos from the funeral, messages of condolence, comments replying to people I barely recognized. And then, a message request from an unknown profile, "We need to meet." "It's about Daniel." I hesitated, then replied, "Who is this?" No answer. I felt the walls closing in. The more I uncovered, the less I understood. Someone had stepped right into my shoes, walked my path, and left me in the dark. But to what end? Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Heart pounding, I peeked through the peephole. No one. I opened the door slowly. On the welcome mat lay an envelope, sealed but unmarked. I picked it up with trembling hands and tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. It was taken at the funeral. Me, standing beside Daniel's coffin. But in the background, half hidden in a shadowed doorway, was a figure watching us, someone whose face I didn't recognize but whose eyes seemed eerily familiar. I flipped the photo over. Written in messy handwriting was one word: watch. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was no accident. Someone wanted me to see this, to know I was being watched. And now, more than ever, I was certain I was not alone in this. Someone was controlling pieces of my life, and I was only just beginning to see the edges of their design. The quiet apartment suddenly felt too small, too exposed. I needed answers. But I also needed to watch my back. Because whoever had been living my life wasn't finished yet. I moved cautiously to the window, peering out into the dimly lit street below. Shadows shifted, figures moved, a casual passerby, or someone waiting for me to make a move. My heart pounded as I scanned every detail, every flicker of movement, trying to catch a sign, a pattern. The city outside thrummed with life, oblivious to the silent war unfolding within these walls. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then unlocked it. The screen displayed a single line: "Meet me where it all began." No signature, no clue. The weight of those words pressed down on me. Where had it all started? I knew the answer, but confronting it meant stepping deeper into the shadows. I swallowed my fear, sliding the door quietly behind me. Tonight, I wouldn't just watch, I'd act. The game was no longer about survival. It was about reclaiming my story before someone else wrote the final chapter. I didn't sleep that night. Morning came sluggishly, the weak sunlight barely reaching through the curtains. I made coffee, my hands still trembling, and stared out the window, half expecting to see someone watching from across the street. But the city was indifferent, the usual noise and bustle a cruel contrast to the chaos inside me. I had to start with the obvious. The funeral. If that was the beginning, then I needed to know everything about that day. I dug through my desk drawers, pulling out the small stack of receipts, photos, and printed texts I'd found over the past week. I spread them across the table, arranging them chronologically, or at least trying to. One receipt caught my eye. It was from a cafe near the funeral home, time-stamped the same afternoon as the service. The name on the receipt was mine, but I had no memory of being there. The total was modest, a coffee and a sandwich, but what unsettled me was the handwriting scrawled on the back, "Don't trust the face you know." My throat tightened. Who was this for? Me? Or someone else? I pulled out my phone and called Daniel's sister, Rachel. She was the only person I knew who had been at the funeral besides me. My voice was cautious, unsure if I was stepping into a trap or reaching for a lifeline. "Rachel, it's me. I need to talk about the funeral. Something's off." There was a pause. Then, in her hesitant voice, she said, "You sound different. Are you okay?" "I'm not sure. I think someone's been pretending to be me. At least, I found this photo." I described the one with the shadowed figure at the funeral. Her breath caught. I saw that person too, but no one recognized them. It was like they slipped in and out of the shadows. I thought maybe it was someone from Daniel's past. Did Daniel have enemies? Rachel hesitated. Not exactly enemies, but complicated relationships. He was involved in some business deals that soured. A lot of people were angry with him, but I never thought it would come to this. I scribbled notes, the pieces falling into a darker pattern. Someone with a grudge against Daniel could be using the funeral as cover to get close to me. But why? And how had they pulled this off without me noticing? After the call, I decided I needed to see the funeral home. Maybe the staff remembered something, a face, a name. Navigating the city felt heavier than usual, every shadow a potential threat. I told myself it was paranoia, but deep down, I knew I was being hunted. The funeral home was quiet in the late morning. I introduced myself as someone doing research on Daniel's life for a memorial project. The receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes, hesitated but eventually allowed me to look through the guest book. There, in the neat, looping handwriting, was my name alongside dozens of others I didn't recognize. I scanned the entries, looking for anything odd. Then, a name caught my eye, Mark Ellis. No one had mentioned him. I asked the receptionist about Mark. "Oh, yes," she said, "he was Daniel's business partner. They had a falling out years ago, but he insisted on attending the funeral, said he wanted to make amends." I felt a cold wave wash over me. Could Mark be involved? More than that, could he be the one who had been living my life while I was unconscious? I left the funeral home with a sinking feeling. The streets seemed narrower, the city less familiar. I pulled out my phone and searched for Mark Ellis. There were a few results: a LinkedIn profile, an old news article about a business dispute, and a social media account that hadn't been updated in years. I hesitated before clicking. The profile picture was sharp, too polished. And then the chill. I realized the face in the photo looked remarkably like me. It couldn't be. Not the same person. But the resemblance was uncanny. My mind raced. If Mark Ellis was using my identity, or vice versa, then I was caught in something far bigger than I'd imagined. Someone had crafted a shadow life for me, or perhaps I'd unknowingly stepped into someone else's. Back in my apartment, I scoured my phone for any messages from or about Mark. There was nothing, no contacts, no calls, no texts. It was as if he existed only in the shadows, just like the figure in the photo. I felt the walls closing in. The receipts, the photos, the messages, they were fragments of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. But I couldn't stop now. Not when the stakes were this high. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. A new message from the same unknown number. Check your mailbox. Now! My breath caught. I wasn't sure if it was a warning or a threat. But the urgency was unmistakable. I moved toward the door, heart hammering. Whoever was behind this was no longer content to lurk in the background. They wanted to pull me deeper into their game. I reached the mailbox and opened it slowly. Inside was a small package, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address. I tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a USB drive and a note, everything you need to know. But be careful who you trust. I stared at it, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Plucking it in could reveal answers, or unleash dangers I couldn't yet imagine. The city outside carried on, indifferent to the unfolding nightmare. And I realized, with a sinking certainty, that there was no turning back. I was already in too deep. That morning, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, stubborn and unyielding despite all efforts to shake it loose. Morning came with a great chill pressing against my windows. I brewed coffee, hands shaking, and sat down at my laptop. After a quick scan with antivirus software, paranoia made me cautious. I plugged in the drive. It mounted smoothly, no password, no encryption. Almost too easy. The folder inside was labeled simply, Truth. Inside were a handful of files, text documents, images, and a video file named meeting.mp4. I started with the text, hoping for a clear explanation, but the first document was cryptic, almost like notes to self, filled with dates and places I didn't recognize. One entry caught my eye. April 12th, 10 p.m., the warehouse. Confirmed, subject is unconscious. Identity secure. Next phase starts. Subject, I whispered to the empty room. Me? What did that mean? I opened the photos folder next. The images were grainy but unmistakable. They showed me, or someone who looked exactly like me, at places I'd never been to. Bars I'd never heard of, standing with strangers whose faces were obscured or turned away. One photo was at that same warehouse mentioned in the notes, taken from a distance, a shadowy figure standing near the loading dock. Then I clicked the video. The screen flickered, and there I was, sitting at a table, face drawn and pale, eyes darting nervously. A man I didn't recognize sat across from me. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and cold eyes, dressed in a dark coat. His voice was low, measured. "Good. You're awake," he said. I blinked, confused. The video was clearly recent, but I had no memory of this conversation. "Who are you?" I heard myself ask, voice trembling. The man smiled thinly. "You can call me Reynolds. I'm here to help you." "Sort of." The video cut off abruptly. My stomach twisted. This Reynolds, was he the one orchestrating all this? The note on the USB had warned me not to trust anyone, but I didn't know who else I could turn to. Before I could think further, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "Meet me. 5 p.m. The cafe on 5th and Main. Come alone." The message made my skin crawl. Was this Reynolds? Or someone else entirely? Either way, Ignoring it wasn't an option. The hours dragged. I kept replaying the video in my head, trying to find clues. Who was this man? What did he want? And why had someone else been living my life while I was unconscious? At 4:45, I left my apartment, locking the door behind me with more force than necessary. The cafe was a small, unassuming place, nothing like the warehouse or the funeral home. I arrived early, sitting in a corner booth where I could see the entrance without being too obvious. Time ticked by. My nerves frayed with every passing minute. Then the door opened. A woman entered. She looked about my age, with sharp eyes and a determined expression, carrying a leather satchel. She scanned the room briefly, then locked eyes with me. Without hesitation, she crossed the room and slid into the booth opposite me. "Are you the one they call?" she began, but stopped herself, watching me closely. I nodded warily. "Yes." "Who are you?" "Name's Harper. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. You're in real danger." "Why?" "What danger?" She leaned in, voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because someone took your place. Someone who wants to bury you completely." My heart pounded. "Who? Why?" Harper glanced around, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. She slid it across the table. It was a hospital discharge form, dated 2 weeks ago. The patient's name was mine, but the photo attached wasn't. It was Mark Ellis. "I found this in your apartment," she said. "You weren't unconscious by accident. You were drugged, kidnapped maybe. They kept you hidden while someone else lived your life." I stared at the paper, disbelief mixing with fear. "But why? Who would do that?" Harper's eyes darkened. "I don't know yet. But I've been following Mark Ellis for a while. He's dangerous. And now, he's using you." Before I could ask more, the cafe door slammed open. 2 men stepped inside, scanning the room with cold, calculating eyes. Harper's expression hardened. "We need to go. Now." I stood, heart hammering. The men were moving toward us. Harper grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back exit. We burst out into the alley behind the cafe, the chill air hitting my face like a shock. "We can't stay," she said. "They'll keep coming. You need to disappear, at least for a while." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the urgency in her voice left no room. As we rounded the corner, I caught a glimpse of the men stepping into the alley, their faces unreadable but unmistakably threatening. The city felt suddenly hostile, every shadow a potential threat. I realized then that I was no longer just searching for the truth, I was running from it. And whatever Mark Ellis had planned, it was far from over. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Where do I go?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She glanced around nervously. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't find you." Her grip tightened on my arm, a silent promise to protect me for now. The night air was sharp with a biting cold as Harper led me away from the cafe. Harper didn't speak as we navigated the empty streets, her grip firm but steady on my arm. I wanted to ask where we were going, but I was too exhausted, too raw, to form the words. My mind was a whirlwind of fragmented memories and half-truths, the funeral I couldn't remember attending, the hospital records bearing someone else's face, and now the terrifying notion that my life had been hijacked. Eventually, Harper stopped at a nondescript building nestled between a closed diner and a boarded-up bookstore. She glanced over her shoulder before pulling a key from her bag and unlocking the door. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly of coffee and worn leather. It was a small apartment, sparsely furnished but tidy, clearly a place meant for temporary refuge. "Stay here," Harper said, locking the door behind us. I'm going to see if I can find out more about Mark Ellis. About what they're planning. I nodded, sinking onto the threadbare couch. The weight of everything pressed down on me, the betrayal, the fear, the overwhelming sense of loss. I was no longer sure who I was, or who I'd been before this nightmare began. Hours passed, the silence punctuated only by the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak from the aging building. When Harper returned, her face was grim but determined. I found something, she said, dropping a folder onto the coffee table. Inside were photos, documents, and a series of text messages between Mark and a man named Donovan, someone I hadn't heard of before. The exchanges were cold, businesslike, but the threat beneath them was unmistakable. They were planning to erase you, Harper said. Not just take your life, but your identity. Mark wanted to disappear, and you were the perfect cover. I swallowed hard, the pieces fitting together in a way that made my skin crawl. Mark had slipped into my life while I was trapped and unconscious, pretending to be me, moving through my world like a ghost. And now, he wanted to make me vanish for good. Why me? I whispered. Why choose my life? Harper shook her head. Because you're replaceable. Because you have no one who would notice right away. But I'm here now, and I'm not letting them win. We spent the next day planning. Harper contacted an old colleague from the police force, someone she trusted. Together, they devised a way to lure Mark out of hiding, to catch him before he could do any more damage. It was dangerous, but it was the only way forward. The night of the sting was tense beyond words. Harper and I waited in the same cafe where it had all begun, hidden in a back room with the lights dimmed low. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. When Mark walked in, his eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. For a brief moment, something flickered in his gaze. Recognition? Fear? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold calculation. Did you miss me? He asked, voice smooth but laced with menace. I stood, every ounce of fear replaced by something fiercer. You're done. I'm not the one who's going to disappear. Before he could respond, the door burst open. Donovan and two officers stepped inside, guns drawn. Mark's face twisted in rage and disbelief. You don't know what you're getting into, he spat. But it was over quickly. Mark and Donovan were arrested, their plans dismantled piece by piece. As they were led away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that the nightmare was ending, sorrow for the life stolen from me, the time lost, the memories erased. In the days that followed, I tried to reclaim what I could. Harper stayed by my side, a steady presence in the chaos. Together, we sifted through the wreckage, piecing together the fragments of a life someone else had tried to own. I went back to my apartment, now cleared of all traces of Mark's intrusion. I changed my locks, my routines, even my phone number. The city no longer felt like home, not yet. But I was beginning to feel something I hadn't in weeks: control. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the shadows of what had happened threatened to overwhelm me. But I learned to hold on to the truth that I was still here, still fighting. More importantly, I was still me. One evening, Harper and I sat on the rooftop of her building, watching the sun set behind the skyline. The light painted the clouds in shades of pink and gold, a fragile promise of something better. I don't know what comes next, I admitted, voice quiet. Neither do I, Harper said. But whatever it is, you won't face it alone. I nodded, letting the weight of those words settle deep inside me. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars would take time to heal. But for the first time since this all began, I felt a flicker of hope. Because I had survived. Because I had reclaimed my life. And no one was going to take it from me again. Harper squeezed my hand gently, a silent vow passing between us. The horizon stretched wide, full of unknowns, but also possibility. Together, we would navigate whatever storms awaited, finding strength in each other's presence. Harper's eyes held a quiet determination that mirrored my own. She pulled me a little closer, her voice barely above a whisper. We've both been broken in ways no one should have to endure. But maybe that's why we're still standing, because we're stronger than we ever believed. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle alongside mine. Stronger, yes. But also, different. The old version of me wouldn't have dared to dream this far ahead. Now, it's like the future is this blank canvas, and we're finally holding the brushes. A soft breeze tangled through the trees around us, carrying the faint scent of rain yet to come. Harper smiled, a flicker of mischief in her eyes. Think we can paint something beautiful? Maybe even happy? I laughed, a sound rusty from disuse but genuine. I'd like that. And I think, for the first time in a long time, I believe we can. Together, we stepped forward, the road beneath our feet no longer just a path of survival, but a journey towards something new, something worth fighting for.